feel like we're live.
Everyone like freezes.
Censor.
Places.
Places, everyone places.
No. You know they can hear what you're saying.
Oh.
And we're live. And welcome to the Freeborn Podcast. It is Sunday afternoon, and I'm here with a very good friend of mine, Catherine, or Katy Fitzharris, and we're here to talk about free speech. She heard some of she listens to all my podcasts, apparently. She's the other listener. And number two listener. Going to give her a little plaque.
Big fan, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I got a fan. Write that down somewhere. And anyway, she heard the podcast where we were talking some about free speech and other issues, and she was very interested in continuing that discussion. So I was real happy. I'm super excited. I've been looking forward to this one since
I see it in your eyes. Whew,
I know. I'm real excited.
Nervous right now.
No, there's nothing to be nervous about. You ready, Tara? We're going to get her. Pile driver.
I think that you'll find that we have a lot of common on this topic.
Okay, well that sounds great.
Yeah.
And so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay.
First.
So my name is Katy. I'm 31 years old. I have a daughter, River May, and I have been attending Freeborn Church for about 1 year now. I'm hearing myself. It's crazy. I think I'm going to take these off.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah,
you do what you need to do.
I may put them on later. Okay.
That's fine.
So I've been attending Freeborn Church for about a year now. My sister, Megan, she actually introduced me because I was going to a different church at the time, so she brought me in here. And my mom goes to Freeborn as well. So, that's a little about me, kind of like my background with the church.
Okay, excellent. And then, so why did the conversation on free speech pique your interest?
Well, so I need to start at like the very beginning of where I came from and how I got here, because free speech to me is something that it's so important to me because I was a part of far left ideologies, and I was deep into it for several years. That's where I was for about like almost a decade. That's where I spent so much of my time just pouring myself into this ideology. And while I was in this ideology, I felt it was incredibly difficult to practice my free speech because, as you know, we both agree on this, like group ideologies are incredibly dangerous for the individual. And being in the far left, I lost my individuality, and I had to subscribe to what the group identity was, which you had to be anti-racist, you had to denounce your whiteness, you had to hate men, you really had to agree with the Me Too movement. I was put in a box, and anything outside of that box, I wasn't allowed to question. I really lost my ability to think critically and think for myself and be the individual that God intended me to be.
How did you get there? How did you get there? So the reason I say, in case anyone isn't aware, I mean, we go way back as far as our families know each other.
Yes, sir.
From before
You've
either
known
one
me
of
since
us.
I was
oh yeah,
a baby.
since you were born.
Yeah,
since you were born, and so I've known your whole family for a very long time. So we come from basically the identical background.
Yeah.
Right?
So you're probably thinking like, how did this happen to her?
Well, how did you get to there from where both of us started in very fundamentalist background, conservative Christian fundamentalist background to that?
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, so I would say that this was like a recipe for disaster. Like the far left is a recipe for a disaster for people like me. I feel I've always been a bit more vulnerable. I'm the youngest in my family, so I've always. I guess you could say I have an addictive personality. It's easy for me to get addicted to things. Mm-hmm. And and I don't want to go too far down into like the
Sure.
rabbit hole of my childhood and everything, because I've come to terms with my childhood, and I am on amazing terms with my family. I love my family. I adore them. They are the foundation of why I'm sitting here today. They've been so supportive. But I was easily swayed. Like, it was very easy for me to get wrapped up in group identities. There's something inside me that it's easy to convince me to do things. And this, I thought about this age thing because I knew you were going to ask this question of like, how did this happen? So I tracked it back to about here, like maybe when I was about like 15 or 16, because up until 15 or 16, I think I had always felt really sure of who I was and how I fit into God's expectations. And I felt good being there. But then around 15 or 16, I just really went off track. And my teenage years were pretty troubling. It's really no secret. And then when I was about 20 or 21, this was when Obama was being elected, and I remember thinking specifically that I was not a fan of Obama. Like, in my heart, I had always been, conservative Republican. So, it's 2008, the Obama election is happening, and some of my friends all I'm hearing is change is going to happen, change, he's going to be the one that changes things. And at first I was opposed to it because I was conservative Republican, as was my family. And in the middle of all this, I'm dealing with, college and trying to find myself and not being sure of who I am, just kind of really just feeling lost. I just was, didn't really know what my place was. And I started hanging out with people who weren't really like far left extremist, but they were, young people who shared that belief system. And it just went downhill from there. I don't want to like call out any names at all, but, hanging around these specific people, I really felt like I was indoctrinated because I was told that my whiteness was a problem, and that
In 2008, you're saying this was when they were. Oh wow.
Yeah, for sure.
So they were on the like the bleeding edge of that ideology, because that wasn't real prevalent back then. You didn't hear a lot of it as much back then. So
but I mean, it was like the beginning of it, though, right?
It was, but it was, most people hadn't even ever heard of it. So that's interesting. Anyways, I'm sorry.
Well, I guess I guess that conversation actually happened a little bit later.
Okay.
But okay. So I was hanging around the wrong people, and it all goes back to, you get people who are vulnerable and they're a little lost and they can't really find their place. And you share with them this ideology that they are the victims and that the whole world is the problem except.
And so how long did it take for them to, let's say, how long did it take for you to become convinced that this leftist ideology was the proper worldview and that you like fully adopted it? How long do you think it took for that to happen?
It kind of felt like it was just like it shattered. At one point, I was like resistant, and then like it was just shattered. I was like, from day one to day two, I was just like a far left, person. But I was losing contact with my family. I was going through, a lot of trouble. I wasn't making really good decisions, and the last thing I wanted to do was to be accountable, was to be responsible, was to be in charge of my own life. I didn't want that. It was, I couldn't do it. Like, I could not make really good decisions at that time. So this ideology fit perfectly for someone like me, because not only did I not have to be responsible or accountable, my bad choices weren't even my fault. Like, it was a free for all. Like, I was like, this is awesome. Like, I literally can get away with anything, and all I have to do is blame the patriarchy. I can, I can blame men. I can blame my past. I can blame my childhood. Like, this is great. And I think it just, man, like, I just felt like I was on a rampage. Like, I was just engulfed in rage. And
So it felt very liberating.
Yeah.
In one way, anyways.
It did, yeah, because, well, okay, so there's layers to this.
Uh-huh.
All right, so think of it this way. Like, you've got me, who is a broken person, and what I'm using as my shield is the group ideologies that the world is so broken and that the world is unfixable, and it's my duty to fix the problems before I fix myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was my spin on things, is how can I fix myself if I have a duty and a responsibility to fix the world that's broken, because there's so much racism, the economy is so bad, Obama, the black president, is facing abhorrent racism in the White House. Like, I have to fix these things. But, looking back, I realized that it was just like, it was all a facade. It was me just putting on a mask and trying to convince family and friends that, I'm not the one that needs to be fixed. It's everything else.
Man, that's interesting. And so,
Yeah.
That's around 2008. And then
Well, okay, but
starting-
2008 for like years.
right.
Yeah.
When would you think that you were like firmly committed to the leftist ideology? By what time? So 2008, you're starting to lean that way, and then
Yeah,
how long?
I would say it got really bad like 2015, 2016.
Okay.
That's when I was at my worst. My life was at its worst at that time. So my ideology was amplified. So I amplified my group identity. Man. So yeah, I would say like 15, 16 when it was like definitely like where I was.
And so
at its worst.
and so at that point, from 2008 to 2016, you've moved very far left. What is your view of Christianity, of Jesus Christ, of those things? What is that? Has that impacted your view on those things at all in that period of time?
Like today?
No.
At that time?
From 2008
Well,
to that point.
Yeah, well, yeah, because you go through not atheism, like I wasn't like atheist, but I was like teetering between agnostic and Christianity. Like you couldn't convince me that there wasn't a God and that Christ was not sent here to save us. But it was easy. I could also easily be put in the other direction of there was mounting evidence that there wasn't a God. And I was consuming all of that evidence from the far left. So I was taking in a lot of why there wasn't a God, but I was also still deep within me, it was something I couldn't let go of. Like, I could not believe in a God. That was just impossible for me to just turn it off and be like, there's no God. There is no God. Even though the evidence that the far left was putting in front of me, which, like, what's like a classic argument that they put out there?
Yeah, like the problem of evil.
Right.
Yeah, if there's a God, why is there evil?
Yeah.
Why is there suffering?
Right. I couldn't explain it.
Yeah.
I really couldn't. And you touched on this, actually. You said with Brett Carpenter that Christians have a problem that we don't have an answer for that. A lot of Christians these days aren't able to articulate clearly to these arguments. And yeah, that is so true.
Yeah,
because
that is a problem.
It's a huge problem. Like, we should have an answer. We should have the ability to explain clearly what our evidence is that there is a God and that he does reign and that there is a Christ who came here and died on the cross and he was risen.
Yes.
And look, I in no way have my answer yet. It is
Right.
it's very difficult for me to explain it because I was raised in a church, so I believed at a very young age. This was instilled into me, and this is something that it probably won't ever leave me. So it's so easy for me to believe it. But when people ask me who have no background in the Christian faith or the Christian walk, I can't imagine being in that position, because for me, like I knew it was so easy to get saved. It was very simple for me to see my mother and my father being Christians and the good that it brought to their lives, and how they centered so much of their decisions on God and Christ. And for me, I had these examples of what Christians who truly walk with the Lord, I had these examples, and I knew, like, that's it. That's why there's a God, because I see him working in my mother, my father, my grandfather, my grandmother. So for someone who doesn't have that advantage, who truly is a part of this secular world,
Yeah.
that amount of faith and belief, I don't even think I'll ever experience that type of salvation, where it's just like blind faith to actually believe. And you've had no help, you've had no examples in your past. So
Yeah, it's almost like learning to speak a second language, right?
Yeah.
When you're growing up, I remember a long time ago when I was a kid in Mexico, I was like 8 years old when we moved to Mexico, and we're in this first church we're at, and there's already people there, and one of the older ladies, Mexican ladies, she tells somebody, I think it was my mom maybe or somebody, she says, "Man, all these little widow kids, all these little white kids, they're so smart." And they said, why do you say they're so smart? And say, well, they're so little and they already speak English. To her, it was like crazy,
Yeah.
right? That little bitty kids could speak English, and she was no way she'd ever going to learn to. She was an elderly lady, right? And so there's no way she's ever going to learn to speak English.
Yeah.
And if she tried, it would never be as good as the English these little kids were speaking,
Yeah.
because they were born in it. So
Yeah.
it just came natural, and they were raised in it, right? They were spoken to from the time they're little, and it's just a native speaker compared to a non-native speaker. And that's a lot of the same similarity I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where you'll have someone like you and I who were born into Christianity, essentially, not
Yeah.
Christians, not saved, but born into that family, into that value
Right,
structure.
right. But don't
It
you
just
think
comes so
but
natural.
don't you think that's like also your disadvantage, because you've never had to truly
No.
really, because it kind of feels like it's almost like a crutch for me, because I never had to have like true blind faith to
Well,
believe.
I see. I understand what you're saying, but here's my take on that. The amount of faith it requires to be saved is exactly the same for everybody.
Right.
There's no difference between. It doesn't matter if you're born into it or if you're raised in some jungle somewhere, and when you're 94 years old, somebody comes into the jungle and you hear the gospel. And you
Okay,
believe.
okay, but the path is much easier for some of us.
Not necessarily.
Because I feel like my path was pretty simple.
Well, that's because you only can tell your path. Mm-hmm. You can only see your path. Mm-hmm. I have seen people get saved that have never heard the gospel, hear it on the street. Somebody's out there shouting.
Yeah.
They hear it, and they're like, "That's the truth."
Yeah.
And they get saved.
Yeah.
Like just like that. And so faith is a miracle. And I understand. I mean, I don't want to minimize the how would I put it? I don't want to minimize the advantage in a certain way. There
Well,
is of being raised in a Christian.
would you call it an advantage?
There is an advantage in some way, but not to faith.
I just hate using that word right now.
Right.
I'm sorry. Like advantage, opportunity. I don't want to stain that word right now.
Right.
So yeah, and I guess that's why it's so. When I had my daughter, I wanted to set her up to not ever have to be that person who their path to faith and salvation is going to be a long, uncertain journey. And so that's why putting her back into church, I had to commit going back to church. And I'll be honest with you, it's painful sometimes.
Yeah,
It can be
understand.
really painful. Like, man, like because when I okay, so there's a little gap of time that I haven't told you about.
Okay.
Wait, no, we have had this conversation before. We've talked about this.
Yes.
Okay. So, when I was probably about 18 years old, I was I I went through something, that was kind of like traumatic, and I woke up the next day and I feel, and okay, I don't like to use this word, but I have to use it because it's the only way I know how to describe
That's
it.
fine.
It felt like a spiritual uplifting, like it was an experience where the wave of sin was just washed away because I was just like, I can't do this anymore, God. I need you to guide me. I need you in my life. I accept you as my Lord and Savior. And I was 18 years old. I think this was like now like the third time I had wanted to be saved and tried to get saved. And there was it felt like an experience. Like I felt something being lifted away. And I had talked to you about this because I had been struggling with like, why can't I feel that again? Like, why can't I feel that experience again? And if I don't feel that experience anymore, that presence of God, am I really even saved? And like, how long is this going to take for me to like go through that moment again? And like, I like, is does that how is that how I know that God is in my life, feeling that strong spiritual experience? So,
And that was when you were about 18.
yeah, that's when I was 18. And then maybe about a year, I was pretty faithful, walking with Christ, and I was like on the streets witnessing. I was, having Bible studies. I was really in love with God. I really was.
And then what do you think happened then after that year?
Well, I started dating someone, and the guy that I was dating, he just was, oh man, he just was really bad news, and that's when it just fell apart, when I started dating someone. And he was also into like far left ideologies. I think he still is till this day. And what he kind of started, talking to me about like these politics and these events, and how I needed, well, he was also really convincing too. Like hearing him talk about it, I was like, man, this guy's like onto something. Like because he's like very, very smart. Like he's probably to this day, he's like one of the like smartest,
Right.
very well spoken. He can really articulate his words. He's very convincing. We don't keep in touch anymore, but I was in a relationship with him for quite some time. And being in a relationship with someone like that, naturally you're going to start acting like them, and you're going to start appearing like them. Look, and this goes back to what I said, how I've always been vulnerable. I've always been easily swayed. So again, it was just like this far left ideology. It's like a leech to people like me. It really turns people like me into monsters. So him and I were dating, for this time, and that's when it just, plumed into madness, really. And and him and I would just sit around, and we would just get each other riled up and talk about the injustices of the world, and how society was not fair. And that's, majority of the time, that's what we would do, is just be angry at the world. And our lives ourselves were obviously not the problem. So
How much of the anger, the angst that you felt at the time against the world was it all like the social component, like racism, or was it sexism, or was it financial, like capitalism, or was it all of the above?
okay, so it was capitalism for sure. That was a big proponent, because capitalism is presented as evil. Why? I don't know. That's a really good question. I haven't gotten a good answer, from anyone in the far left to describe why capitalism is evil, because I see so much good from it. Now I do. Did you hear about one of the poorest cities in India who adopted a capitalist economy
No, I
in one of
didn't.
their most poorest districts, and they're thriving now?
I
They've
didn't.
built an economy, and
But
they're
yeah,
pulled out of poverty because they've adopted a
right.
Western capitalist economy.
No, I haven't heard about that. I'll look into it. I do know that I've followed India for a while because back in the early '80s, Milton Friedman would point out that India was following a non-capitalistic approach,
Yeah.
and it was holding everybody down. So everybody was working these
Yeah.
little looms, and they would never industrialize. And so you're like kids at 6 are working the loom
Yeah.
because the whole family has to work the loom, and the government's protecting that, not wanting the little family business to
Yeah.
go away. And then recently, India has pulled back on those regulations, and yeah, they're one of the fastest growing economies
Yeah, they
in
are.
the world.
Okay, so I'll have to remember what the name of this community. But there's a really good Netflix show about this economist who travels around the world and talks about capitalism and the good that it brings. But it's also, I don't want to be so, oh man, okay, I could just go on a tangent right now.
That's all right.
I don't want to go. So when I pulled out of far left, I went immediately into far right. So I went into one group identity into the other.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be very careful to protect the individual. And this is why like I refuse to subscribe to a political party. I won't do it. I'll share some values from the left, I'll share some values from the right. But I have to be very careful to not announce that I am a Republican.
Right.
I am a libertarian, because it doesn't allow me to be truly critical about the information that's placed in front of me. Because once I subscribe to a group, that group has an agenda, and the right does it more so on the left. Though the left is much more like this than the right, but the right has an agenda. And if I go too far right on these issues and I just focus on the information that the right is giving me, then I've lost my individuality. Then I can't think critically for myself and formulate an authentic idea, an authentic opinion about these fundamentally very important issues. Mm-hmm. So back to capitalism, I know that it's not a perfect system, and I know that it can be taken advantage of, and it has been taken advantage of, that there are people on the top who have benefited from the amount of wealth that they've accumulated from capitalism. It isn't perfect, but it's the most perfect system that we have right now.
To paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, he was speaking of government, of democracy and government, but to paraphrase him, we could say that it's the worst system in the world, except for all the other systems.
Yeah.
That's what basically
Right.
Benjamin Franklin said about democracy.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's the most perfect
So
one.
what's interesting, So what to me is so fascinating about capitalism, as a Christian, is that capitalism, in one way, is completely simpatico with the Bible. In one way,
Is it?
Yes, and in another way, it's completely against the Bible.
Right.
It's real interesting. And the way in which it's against the Bible is that the Bible prescribes as the ideal system of humanity, whether it be government, social, financial, it doesn't matter. Any type of system in human system, the perfect ideal system is charity. Mm-hmm. Charity. But charity.
Okay, wait. Can you please define charity?
Okay.
Because this is.
Yes, that's a good, because I'm using a King James Bible
Okay, good,
language.
because I'm not. I need to define charity because I don't want charity. I need a definition of it.
Right.
Like, what is the biblical definition of charity?
So-
What are the boundaries? When does it stop becoming charity?
Okay, so charity in the King James Bible is a word that is used to differentiate what we might call everyday love from a love that is completely selfless. Mm-hmm. So in the Bible, in the King James Bible, when it uses the word charity, it is speaking of this perfect, idealistic love, where you, and love is not in a feeling, but it's where you care more or care about the other person and not yourself.
Okay, but you can also use discretion without love, though. You can be.
What do you mean?
Okay, so, well, you know what?
No, go ahead.
No, because I need to hear the definition first,
Right.
and then I can jump back to this one.
So love, biblically, love is not a feeling. It is a decision. So when Jesus says, love your enemies, first off, it isn't that they stop being your enemies. So you can have an enemy, someone you don't trust, someone you wouldn't hang out with, someone you would have a gun to protect yourself from, but you can love them. So it's not a feeling. It's a decision.
Okay.
Love is.
Okay. So
Go ahead.
what is the action that follows that decision?
Putting that person's well-being before your
Okay.
own. That's what love is.
Okay.
And then Paul, mainly, the Bible does it in a couple places, but Paul really is the one who cemented the Christian view of charity, not charity in the modern sense, of the King James Bible word sense. When he wrote 1 Corinthians 13, that charity suffereth long, charity does this. If I have everything and I don't have charity, I'm nothing, right? So he wrote that beautiful chapter of 1 Corinthians 13.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
It is. It's the most beautiful expression of love there is. And in that you find what he's talking about, this perfect, idealistic love that is not about what you feel about somebody. It isn't about a relationship you have with somebody. It is about saying, I'm putting that person before myself, their interest before my interests. That's the ideal system.
Okay.
And in that system, you don't need police, you don't need government, you don't need finances, you don't need money, because it's charity.
That's impossible.
Well, it's impossible now, right?
Can't.
Now
I don't think it's ever been possible.
No, it never has, but it will be.
Yes.
It will be, right? And that's
it's
what
we
he's
hope
saying.
for.
It is what right. It is what we have an earnest expectation to.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And that's another word you have to define out of the Bible, because people hear hope and they hear hope as in, I hope so. Like maybe not, I hope, maybe. But in the Bible, hope is certain expectation.
Right.
So it's like when you're real cold at night and you're out in the field like camping, you're super cold, and you say, I'm hoping for the sunrise. Well, you're not hoping for it in the sense that it might not happen.
I expect
You're
it,
hoping, saying it is going to happen, and I can't wait for it to happen.
Right.
And that's the hope we have in this
Right.
charity paradigm that God is going to establish. But that's the perfect system, charity. Well, capitalism is destroyed by charity. Because capitalism only works and when everyone seeks their own interest.
Right.
To give you an example, it's like
Wait,
playing
hold
poker.
on.
Okay.
Capitalism only works.
If everybody is looking out for themselves.
Okay.
That's the only way it works. That is why it works. We'll get to that. So here's the example. Hold on. Here's the illustration.
Okay.
The illustration is, let's say you're playing poker. Okay? Everyone's playing poker. Now, poker can be a lot of fun. But there's two requirements for playing poker to make it fun. One is you have to play with real money. It has to be your own money. Because if you're playing with fake money or other people's money, you're just throwing money.
Yeah. There's no risk.
There's no risk.
Yeah.
So it has to be your money.
And it's not a thoughtful game.
That's right.
It's just there's no rhyme or reason.
I bet everything on this. I have 2 twos.
Yeah, yeah. You're playing like kids in Monopoly right now.
Yes, exactly. So it has to be that. And everyone has to be competitive. You have to want to win. If you're sitting there and you're playing poker and you're playing with 3 and she's playing, and Terry, you put the camera on you, Terry, so everyone knows you're there. There you go.
By the way, we're forcing Terry to join in pretty soon.
Terry's doing Nolan's job today. So if you don't like the camera work, that's all Terry's fault.
Actually,
it's Nolan's fault.
Concentration on doing. I can't even think.
Okay, so if we're all playing poker and Terry starts saying, I just like you guys so much. I want you to win. I'm going to bet big when I have bad hands because I want you to win.
Okay, but
the poker game falls apart.
Whoa, no way. Right, because then the only way that capitalism can also work is with competitiveness. And if she no longer becomes competitive, then that breaks the system.
That's her caring for her interests. That's right.
So charity can't exist in capitalism.
No. Well, charity can exist in people who are practicing capitalism,
but capitalism,
but not to the ideal, not to the state of the ideal.
Right, but in order for capitalism to generate profit, there has to be competition.
Yeah, there has to be self-interest.
Yes, competition can't exist inside the biblical definition of charity.
No, exactly right. So charity kills capitalism.
Yep.
Now, small amounts of charity can exist in capitalism and not cause any problem.
Right.
Right. But the more charity, and by that I mean real love, there is in the system, the worse capitalism performs. But it's not a bad thing because people behave better.
Yeah.
right? It's not like you end up with some terrible system. It's not like charity's bad in there, but it is killing capitalism. It
Yeah.
is a beneficial poison.
Yeah.
And
but-
when Christ comes and establishes worldwide, complete, true charity, capitalism is dead.
All right. Okay. So just to kind of here's my final thoughts on that. Or it doesn't have to be final. We can keep going. But this is my thought is okay, so we have the supreme system that obviously charity
That's right.
that charity can't exist in this world. It's impossible because humans are crazy. We're crazy right now. Like
We're selfish.
we're self-centered. So the next best thing is capitalism because I see the benefits of capitalism is it addresses poverty.
Yeah.
It picks people out from poverty, like this community in India who man, you want to talk about real poverty. You want to see poverty as it doesn't get more real than India, where people are, especially when COVID hit India. I know that a lot of people were saying like stay inside, close businesses, shut it down, but all the work that India had done to take these people out of poverty was wiped out.
Yeah.
Clean. Like these people in India were sent straight back to where they started from. Like they had a taste of what life could be, and it was stripped away from
Yeah,
them.
I read a report that within the first couple of weeks, I think they estimated 500 million people were back in poverty again.
Starving.
Yeah. Yeah, but
Back
by
to-
poverty,
yeah.
I mean real poverty.
Real
like that,
poverty.
starving.
Starvation.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so capitalism works that way because it is a system, it's a brilliant system designed
Yeah.
to take self-interest and turn it into pseudo-charity,
yeah.
right? Pseudo-love. Self-interest plays the part of love
Right.
because we're not...
Unintentional.
I think it's intentional because Adam Smith is basically the creator of this. So I don't know if you've read Wealth of Nations, which is an old book written in 17...
I've heard of it. I
Published
haven't
in
read it.
1776. And it's like the Bible of capitalism.
Yeah.
So Adam Smith called it the invisible hand.
Yeah.
And that is that there's this... That capitalism has this invisible force that makes you behave as if you cared about everyone else and not
Yeah.
yourself. So his illustration is, he says, imagine a butcher. A butcher gets up at 4 a.m. and starts cutting up the meat and getting it all ready and getting it all nice and ready to cook and puts it out there. Why does he do that? Does he do it because he cares about his neighbors? Or
Yeah.
does he do it because he wants to turn a profit?
Right.
But the point is there any perceivable difference between him caring about himself or caring about his neighbors when the end result is his neighbors get good meat?
Yeah.
Well, there's no difference. You
Right.
can't see the difference there.
But
Now,
everyone benefits.
that's right.
He benefits. The neighbor benefits.
That's right. It's as if
the
it were
business
love.
benefits. Yeah.
It's as if he had acted out of love.
Right.
But because capitalism, the way it works, he didn't act out of love.
Right.
He acted out of the opposite of love.
Right.
In other words, from a Christian perspective, you say he's selfish. All he cares about is himself. And that's the accusation against capitalism from the left.
Well, I think they take it further.
Go ahead.
So I think they take it even further than just saying that someone is being selfish. They take it as far as saying this is the ultimate evil. They subscribe to the belief that capitalism right now on this earth is the real evil. That is the monster, and we have to fight it. And that's what a lot of that anger is pushed into it. Okay, but yeah, not poverty, right? Like that's not the real evil.
Right. So,
Yeah,
but
come
here's,
on, like
no, I
you're not
understand.
going to address these.
So that's
the
interesting you
starved-
bring that up. So here's a way of looking at that. And I want to kind of, it's a little bit of a devil's advocate, but it's also, I believe this. So here's a way of looking at this.
Okay.
And when leftists say that capitalism is the evil of the earth, I actually agree with them.
Okay.
I actually agree with them that it is. We are rewarding the most selfish behavior possible.
Okay, but I wouldn't say that's the most evil thing that you can do.
Hold on. So we're rewarding the most evil behavior possible, okay? But
Okay.
why are we doing that?
Okay.
But hold on, let me finish.
You still have to convince me why it's the most evil behavior.
Because it's the opposite of love. So if love is the greatest thing that can be, which I think it is, I don't think there's anything greater than pure charity, as Paul describes in 1 Corinthians 13. Paul says that everything else, faith, hope, it all dies. Faith and hope are going away. When Christ comes back, there's no more faith and there's no more hope.
Okay.
But charity says maybe not the only thing, but charity remaineth forever, he says.
Okay. So what
So
do you
it's the
say?
greatest.
What do you say to the butcher who, because he makes a profit on this business, he takes that profit and he puts it towards his child's education. He takes that profit and he puts it towards paying off debt. He takes that profit and uses it towards very good things that uplift his family and also contribute to a better, more functional society. If capitalism is as pure evil as you and the far left says, then that means nothing good can come out of capitalism.
That's where the leftists are wrong. So my point here is, even though I agree with their principle, but now I agree with it from me and the leftists would never get along because we're saying yes, it's evil, but from very, very different perspectives. I'm looking at it from a biblical Christian perspective.
Okay.
And from a biblical Christian perspective, if love is the greatest virtue, then capitalism is the greatest evil because it is the opposite of love. It is rewarding selfish behavior. We're going to give you money because you act selfishly. But then why would Christians support capitalism? Well, I do. Because it is pseudo-love. It's the closest thing to love we can enact on earth right now.
I have a real problem with you calling it evil.
I understand you do. So, and that's okay.
But I guess you could say all our behaviors are evil.
But I'm also saying it's
Yeah.
pseudo-love. I'm saying that capitalism is the closest thing to love we humans can fabricate. And that's because only God can make real love.
Right. But
we can't.
Okay, but I just think the mechanism of capitalism has brought so much good.
Yes.
And so I have a problem with you saying this is the ultimate evil.
But that's why it's so fascinating. That's why it amazes me.
It's a fascinating argument. You're right.
It fascinates me that we have taken what is the greatest evil, which is that is the problem with humanity, is selfishness. We've taken selfishness, and this is the amazing insight of the Anglo-American thinkers, the British, even some of the French, mainly the British and the American thinkers, going back to Adam Smith, John Locke, all these guys. Their brilliance, and this comes from the very strong Puritan background that they came from. Their brilliance is, we cannot get rid of sin.
Right.
People are going to be horrible, sinful, selfish people. There's no changing that. The French thought they could change that.
Yeah.
They did their revolution and they were going to make everyone angels.
Yep.
And it turned into just blood running through the Yes. The Puritans said, because of their idea of original sin, they said, no, it's impossible. Sin is built in genetically or whatever, but it's built into the person. So they said, let's take the worst part of mankind, which is their selfishness. They're only looking out for themselves, and turn that into something that approximates love.
Yeah.
And if it approximates love, even if God won't acknowledge it as love, but it'll work like love. It'll work almost exactly like love. And that's what you're seeing. So when you look at capitalism now, you're seeing the end result of it, which is great.
Right.
You're seeing this system that lifts everybody out of poverty. So the leftists would say capitalists are going to drive the prices up because they only care about themselves. But the thinkers said, no, they'll drive the prices down because they only care about themselves.
Right.
Not up.
Right.
Walmart doesn't raise prices. And the reason they don't raise prices isn't because they care about you. It's because they care about themselves.
Right.
They want to be the biggest store on earth. Amazon wants to be the biggest store on earth. How do they do that? Lowering prices. You say, well, that benefits me. I know, but it wasn't their intention.
Yeah.
That's what's so brilliant about it.
I mean, and maybe, you know what? And maybe I just have a really hard time with you siding with the leftists on this one.
So do they. They hate it.
Yeah. As an ex-leftist, I don't like this.
But like I said, my view of this is not their view. So their view is capitalism, every bit of it is evil, and we
Right.
need to undo it. And we're going to do
And
what?
we have to vanquish it and replace
Yeah.
it with what?
Exactly.
You know, so my rebuttal to that is, look, if you're going to do away with a system that has been working, although imperfectly, and if you're going to do away with a system, what is the new system? And how is it going to function like capitalism, but even better?
Right.
So it has to deliver the same results, deliver the same profits, but better. So now you have your standard, which is capitalism. That's what you have to build up
So
on.
this is what they tried to do. And you're probably real versed in this, but in the 20th century, this was the plan. So Marx and Engels come out and they say, basically, what I'm saying, capitalism is evil. It's about selfishness and self-interest. And we want to institute a system that is built on love. Now, that's not their language. They used different language, but that's essentially their argument. We are going to build a system built on love, where everybody works for everybody else's good. We call it communism and socialism. We're all going to work for everybody else's good. They tried to create charity, and it failed because
unauthentically.
only God can create
Right.
charity.
Right.
And fake charity.
Because you're depending that everyone is going to be charitable
Right.
and not self-serving. You're depending on humanity to do that.
Yes, and how are you thinking
How do you
they're going
manage
to be that
Yeah.
way?
How do you regulate
Force.
that? Yes.
Force.
Brute
but
force.
charity can't come by force.
Yes.
See, if you tell somebody you have to love that person, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
The only way, that's why charity is so amazing. The only way you can love a person is if you love them.
Yeah.
Has to be in you. Who has to come out of you.
Yeah.
Right? And they come in, they say, no, we're going to make everyone love each other. And if everyone loves each other, we don't need capitalism. Well, they're right. If everyone loves each other, we don't need capitalism. In fact, capitalism cannot exist. It sucks all the oxygen out of it. Love does. But they can't make anyone love each other. You have the same people who still hate each other, who still are selfish, pretending to love each other.
Yeah.
And that system was a complete disaster.
Yeah. Still is.
Yes. And is going to continue to be. It's coming
Yeah.
back, and it's going to be a complete disaster.
Well, I think that they're moving away from replacing capitalism with communism to socialism. But that's more government though. That's
So communism is actually a complete system, including religious.
Right.
It actually it covers the whole thing. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, to me, capitalism. I love capitalism as a economic. I'm not an economist, but I read a lot about
Right.
economics, and I really like to look at the world through that lens. Everything in the world I look at through economic lens.
right. So
So on that level, or with that hat on, I love capitalism.
yeah.
As a Christian, I can't wait till it goes away.
Right.
But it has to go away with true charity. There's only
Right.
one way it's going away successfully. And that's when Christ comes back and actually changes everybody's heart. Now imagine a world where nobody cared about themselves. They only cared about everyone else. Where they really did, not where anyone told them to. They woke up every day you woke up, and only the way you feel about your daughter.
I was just about to say, yeah. But look, and I don't want to be hypocritical about it, because even as a mother, you still have moments when you do put yourself
Yes.
in front of your children. Like,
But that's about the purest way we can imagine.
exactly.
It,
Like
right, at the moment.
there have been many thousands of moments where I've looked at my daughter and been like, oh my gosh, I am going to die for her. Right now, I am going to die for her. I am going to do whatever I can to make sure she makes it.
Yes.
I have moments like that all the time. And then I have other moments where, I'm just like, oh man, I'm so
now
tired.
she's
I
gonna
need to go
die.
to bed, and you need to go to bed, and it's not bedtime, but you're going to bed. So, yeah, I think that the closest thing you can get to that is like being a parent.
Yes, and especially
Really.
a mother.
Yes.
There's a difference between fathers and kids and
Yes,
mothers and kids.
yeah.
A mother and their daughter, mother and their child is about the closest we can envision that right
Yeah.
now. So imagine the way you feel in your daughter at the very best possible moment. Magnify that times infinity,
Right.
and say that it never ends.
Yeah.
And it's in every single person on earth.
Yeah.
Feel that way about everybody all the time without exception.
Yeah. I can't process that.
No, nobody can.
Yeah.
But if you can just like in any way come close to imagining that, and you're like, that's the kingdom.
Yeah.
That's the kingdom. And so then they say, is the kingdom capitalistic? No.
Right.
In the kingdom, capitalism would be the worst evil.
Right.
If you saw anybody doing something out of self-interest, even if it benefited other people, you'd be appalled. It'd be
Right.
like, that doesn't belong in the kingdom. Because the kingdom is this place where we only care about everyone else. Not because we're mandated to, but because we want to, the way mothers do it with their daughters or
Yeah.
sons. So, yeah, that's my view. So when I say that capitalism is evil, it's in that broad context of seeing it from the, if you could stand in the kingdom and look out into
I know,
capitalism.
but you got to be so careful, like how you word that, though.
I
like,
agree.
you
But
got to be
I
real
fire
careful.
for effect.
I know. You're just trying to get a rise on me. Yeah.
Okay, so you're 18. You got into a bad relationship.
Yeah, okay.
And you've really taken a sharp turn now into leftism.
Yes.
Are you reading anything from like leftist authors? Do you have any like? Or are you getting most of it third hand through friends and stuff?
Third hand through friends and media.
Oh, okay.
That the bulk of my leftism was media driven. So that's where my information was coming from. CNN, MSNBC, all of these, mainstream media, which now I don't I can't even consider the media right now journalism, because I just feel like everything that I'm looking at is just saturated in just false information, and it's exhausting to have to sift through this news journalism and try to figure out like what is real, what is truthful, did this really happen, is this the full context, what are they leaving out? Like I have to be so skeptical with my news media right now. And I listen to NPR. I could listen to NPR maybe like an hour, and then I gotta switch it around. But I try to, be balanced. I don't really listen to Fox News, even to this day. But I've really gotten into local news, local journalism, local government issues. I've really kind of picked up on that. But yeah, so just going back to what really fueled me and my anger was a lot of what the media was putting out in front of me. So a lot of what I was watching was designed. They specifically design their content to infuriate you. As a far left, like they are clever, like their headlines are clever, their editing is very clever, who they choose to be on their panel is extremely clever. Like they are very meticulous in how they want their information to be presented, because there's a goal to that. There's a reason why they're so meticulous. Is they can't present true journalism, because that would be presenting the real story. And so their take on it is they have to edit it. They have to condense it down into a version that will infuriate their base and keep that base on lockdown. Like this is
Yes. Some people would hear that and think that that's conspiratorial. That can't be. But I just was listening to Tim Pool, who we talked about before we started, this independent journalist. I encourage everyone to look him up. I think he's a great journalist. And he's more left-leaning. He identifies more as left, but he doesn't report as left. He reports news.
See, I still have a little bit, I'm a little bit more left too.
Right. So I was just listening to him, and he's talking about, he was doing a report that came out just recently, one of his reportage. And he says that when he used to work at a place called Fusion, and which was left-leaning, and he was like editor-in-chief or something. And he asked, why are we using these type of headlines? Why are we reporting stories the way we are, which is how you're describing it? And he says they told him that the best way to get a video or a news story to go viral is to make the leftist
base.
Women, leftist
the women?
Women angry, that they statistically will retweet and like push a story if they're mad. If you can get these leftist women angry, they're going to like make that story go viral because they're mad about it. And so they would actually try to make that demographic angry. so that their stories would be pushed into the headlines.
Yeah, I could totally see that because it worked. Well, they played me. Yeah. I did. You know what? And I do have to say that like my anger when like a news article would come out, it was first I felt anger, and then I felt I got to do something about this. I have to be vocal about it. I have to push this. So yeah, I could totally, I could totally believe that.
They had your number.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So then how do you get out of that?
Yeah, you're like, what happened?
Yeah, now I'm very curious.
All right. So there's a very specific moment. Okay, so let me scroll back just a little bit because this is important. So I'm deep into this group ideology, and I don't think for myself, and I don't think critically because I trust my group. Mm-hmm. I trust that the left has the best interest of me, that I trust that what they're telling me is truthful, that my white privilege has given me certain opportunities and that my white privilege is a real problem. Like I trusted them that what they were telling me was truthful and honest. And that's a big problem because when you trust the group, you're not allowed to think outside of that. You can't think critically and you can't criticize bad ideas or ideas within the group. And I say that specifically to criticize bad ideas because the moment came when I was, and you probably know about this, the Real Time with Bill Maher with Ben Affleck and Sam Harris.
Yeah, uh-huh.
That was an eye opener for me because within me, I there were some things that I was questioning. There were times when I was like, I don't know about this. This seems a little. I don't really agree with this, but I didn't question it because it's like, no, you don't go against what the group says because you know what happens, right? You get called a racist, you get called a Nazi, and you get bullied, and again, the people that I'm hanging out with, like these are people who like would not allow any far right conversation to happen. And if you questioned any of these beliefs, like you were met with like a lot of pushback, a lot of anger. So I'm watching Bill Maher, who I love. It's his setup is just like so great for far left because one, you have an audience who is biased.
Oh yeah.
Well, and like semi-biased.
No, they're real biased.
I guess they are, but occasionally you will get some people in there who kind of.
If you get the right guest who's really, really smart and knows how to
Peterson.
play an audience. Yes, and knows how to play an audience. There's a couple of them. Like Ann Coulter did real well in his audience.
Oh yeah, she was pretty good with him.
But they have to be real sharp, real quick, and they have to be very acerbic. So they have to be able to take over and be worse than he is in that way, or better than he is, however you want to call it. More acerbic.
So, all right. So this is during ISIS. Mm-hmm. Right. So I was hearing the rhetoric about ISIS and Islamophobia, and to me, even leaning far left, I could see that there was a big problem with Islam because it was so brutal. Like what they do to gays, what they do to women, what they do to children,
Christians, anybody they don't like.
Yeah. It is like, whoa, man, like that, like I was really struggling with like, okay, wait, you want me to be so pro religion and we can't like impede these rights of these Muslim groups, but like this is a big problem because I wasn't seeing anyone from the Muslim community who was really standing up and taking charge of the ISIS movement and saying like, oh, no, not on our watch. We are not a part of this. And I was expecting like even certainly maybe even the left media could pick up on a story like that, but not even the left media was doing a really good job at finding someone in the Muslim community who was really denouncing these terroristic organizations who, because what they were doing instead was saying that this isn't Islam, this is Islam that's been hijacked, right? But like when they're doing these terroristic attacks, though, they're putting it in the name of Allah and saying we are doing this is Islam and we are doing this in the name of Allah and we kill because Allah commands it. So I was really struggling with that internally, but I couldn't voice that because if I did, then I'm Islamophobic, you know?
Yeah.
That
Which
was
is,
like,
is so interesting that the left is in many ways such a staunch defender of Islam that fundamentally stands against everything they agree with, everything they believe.
it is because one, like, aren't the left isn't the left supposed to be the protector of the LGBT groups, of minorities, of women and children? Like, aren't they because they are liberal, and you liberalize you people from captivity, oppression. Like, this is certainly something that the left could really jump on and support. No,
Very few of them do.
Yeah, no, it was just the total opposite. It was like these people have a platform and they are untouchable. You do not touch this religious group. So, funny enough, Bill Maher is a huge critic.
Yes, he's one of the
Islam.
few.
He's one of the few, and like he is authentic about it.
Yes.
Like, I've watched so many of his interviews, and he will go to bat where he is like, "No, this is a really bad thing, and like, how can you defend this?" So, I was watching Sam Harris was a guest. And Sam Harris, who's an atheist, who's actually like anti-religion across the board.
Yeah, he's the new atheist.
Yeah. Have you watched the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris debates?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. We got to get into that. Okay. So Sam Harris comes on the show, and I guess I'm just sharing this for anyone who's watching right now, just so they can kind of have like background, because it's big. So Sam Harris comes on the show, and him and Bill Maher are on the same page about this, but the panel forgot who else was on the panel, but they were all against Bill Maher and Sam Harris. But Ben Affleck, who is like this uber rich, successful celebrity who like lives in a mansion, and he looks like he's drunk on the show, and
well, he was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He looked really like
he was sloshed.
He was like, yeah, he was hammered on that show. So Sam Harris is talking about like, okay, here are the problems. Like, these people are murderers. They kill gay people. They are holding women and children captive. They're killing women and children, all in the name of Allah. Like, this is what happens when religion gets out of control, and you get some people who say we do this in the name of religion. So that was Sam Harris's like perspective of, it's like things can go really bad when you do things in the name of religion. Ben Affleck freaks out, and he like the anger that he showed, it took me back, because it was like I was watching myself for the first time. I was seeing myself, and I was like, whoa, I've totally been that sloshed person who's like so angry about like these, they're just ideas. That's all they are. Just criticisms. There's nothing dangerous about what he was saying. Like,
yes.
It was an idea, and it was a new idea, and it was worthy to be talked about.
Yeah, and he wasn't advocating. Sam Harris wasn't saying the U.S. needs to go and bomb those countries off the face of the earth.
Right.
He's saying we need people within Islam to stand up and say, no, that cannot be this way. We are not going to be this way, and break with that.
I mean, that seems reasonable, right?
Well, yeah.
Right? Because the left demands that from us. They demand it from Trump all the time.
Yeah.
So, okay. So Ben Affleck gets like super, he gets really emotional. He gets really angry. He's not really being coherent, which is like kind of sad because I wish I could have like seen him like sober and defend his side. But it was just like so many people were watching like this is what the far left can do to you. It can just make you just angry, and like you don't even know what you're angry about, but you're just like really angry like about this little idea. And so, Bill Maher's kind of like, whoa, okay, like trying to handle like this, cross,
Yeah.
talk.
And Sam Harris says that I saw an interview of him when he talked about it, and he says that both him and Maher were like, felt, they didn't know what to do because they said, if you've never like been and met a movie star, a big movie star,
Yeah.
and been in, they said, these guys have a presence about
Oh,
them
yeah.
that's like heavy.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, oh no.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Ben Affleck is mad at me.
Oh, yeah.
That's like, Batman's mad at me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so
and then
they said, he felt kind of like intimidated.
Yeah.
'cause-
And I was listening to Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan said that he was like on steroids because he was preparing for his Batman movie. So he was just like pumped up. So then the moment came when Sam Harris said something, and it was a just one line, and that's all it took. Just one line. And he looks at Ben and he goes, Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. As soon as I heard that, a light bulb went off when I was like, this is the moment I've been waiting for someone to say, you have a right to think, you have a right to be critical, you have a right to criticize bad ideas. Like, it's like the veil was lifted, and it was just that one line. And then from there, it was just a catalyst of events where I just was like pulled out of it. There were so many other things where I couldn't stop thinking about this. I couldn't stop thinking about like, why do we need to criticize bad ideas? Why is that so important? And why did Sam Harris, why did he say it like that? I couldn't let go of it. So I tried it on the guy that I was dating.
Bet that went over well.
Let me tell you what happened. So I was thinking like, I'm going to, you know what? Because I had already been leaning that like Islam was there was some trouble going on, and I couldn't align myself with like the far left's position on it. And so I was doing my own research on the side and just kind of looking into Sam Harris, looking into like some of these other like provocative thinkers. And one night, me and this guy I'm dating, we're out, we're partying, and we start talking about what we always do, which is like the far left views. And I looked at him because we were talking about like the Islam faith, and I was like, yeah, but are you okay with this? Like, are you really okay with what's going on with ISIS and everything? And man, like these Muslim people like who are partaking in this, like this is intense, And he was like, oh, we can't be like one-sided about this. And he just kind of was like going off on his rant. And I was like, yeah, but we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. So like he obviously he had a rebuttal to it. But I remember looking at him and just being like, man, like this is like Ben Affleck right here. Like this is, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Like, I don't know how much longer I can just be like trapped in this anger and this frustrations. Like, I don't know how much longer I can do with it. And like, I miss thinking for myself. I miss formulating ideas. I miss having opinions. I miss feeling that I can express myself without being pushed back with like, oh, well, you have white privilege, so that's why you get to express yourself, or oh, like you've had these opportunities. And so yeah, that was the moment.
Okay.
And
then where do you go from there?
Well, as I said, like this wasn't something that I could really stop thinking about, and I went into like a hibernation mode where I just stopped talking about like my leftist point of views. And I started researching, I started reading, I started, looking into YouTube. And then the big moment when I saw Jordan Peterson on Bill Maher. And I just watched this YouTube clip to kind of get like a reminder of why that he was so important as well. You know, and off the top of my head, I can't really remember the conversation he had with Bill Maher, but I remember feeling so taken aback by this, you know, these two men, Bill Maher and Jordan Peterson, sitting together and talking about like why the individual is so important, and when groups start becoming dangerous is when, you know, the group identity trumps the individual. And so I dived real deep into Jordan Peterson's lectures, his biblical series. I haven't got through all of his biblical series, but I just started really diving deep. And, you know, then I found Christina Hoff Sommers, you know, these feminists from the second wave feminism, and they're very critical of third wave feminism, and they're very critical of second wave feminism. And I, you know, it's like I just found reasonable people from creditable backgrounds who were talking about issues that I had always been told they were one-sided. This is the only right way to think about this issue. And then, you know, then you have this pot of ideas from these really important people who are saying like, no, the individual needs to formulate these ideas on their own. It wasn't until I had my daughter and I started coming back to Freeborn Church and, you know, surrounding myself, you know, with like-minded Christians, where I kind of just, I let it all go and was like, this ideology, it's broken. It's a broken system. It's corrupt. So earlier I mentioned about how I went so far left and then I went so far right.
Can we pause?
Mm-hmm.
It says, this stream has been stopped because we detected copy.
Yeah, no, it's because of what she's talking about.
Yeah, wow.
That's fine. We're recording. Just keep
Okay.
going. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, they banned you for what you're doing. You just got pulled off of YouTube for what they did. Well, for those
Wow.
I don't know if they will even be able to. I'm going to put a chat on.
Hitchens on Bill Maher and his audience. That's awesome. That's what Brando said. Brando says that Hitchens owned Bill Maher and his audience. It was awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I saw
Brando,
that.
Lena's husband?
It must be Brando.
Okay.
Lena's
Yeah,
husband.
okay. That's completely off. We're recording and we'll upload it and we'll see what happens.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you say you just been banned by YouTube for talking about this. Censored.
Oh, I'm part of the movement now.
You are. You got censored. You got censored.
Awesome.
That's how things go viral when, you know, they
Well,
Yeah.
put a stop to
That's
it.
hilarious that they just did that.
wow.
Where were we?
All right. So I'll pick off on a really important thing, because I think that this can happen really easily for someone who is being pulled out of an ideology. The tendency is to go to the opposite side, to the far extreme side, right? So you have one extremity that you're no longer a part of, and you have to replace that with an additional as the opposite extremity. So the mistake that I made was I went very far right. So now I was no longer like an extreme far leftist. I was like anti-left ideas and only pro-right ideas. And that hurt me too, because again, now look, it's way more dominant on the left side. On the right side, there's room to be a bit more vocal about liberal ideas and to have a little bit more pushback with far right ideas. I will say that. But I found myself again in an extreme political group. Once again, I was like right where I started, and I started getting a little bit more deeper into Jordan Peterson. And I stumbled upon this one debate with him and Stephen Fry. The
monk debate.
Yeah, the monk debate. Mm-hmm. And Jordan Peterson starts talking about the individual. And he talked about how we are individuals, and that individual, our individuality is what is supreme. It is above the group. And once that group overshadows all of its complex individuals, once it overshadows all of that and puts a blanket and says, all of you beautiful, sovereign individuals, you all must think the same, and you have to adopt whatever the group says is okay to adopt. And that was the light bulb moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to subscribe to another political party. I am an individual, and that is who I will be for the rest of my life. And I kind of took it a step further, and I believe that God has placed within us this individuality, this personality, this uniqueness in order to come up with ideas and come up with opinions, and they're not always right, they're not always wrong. Like earlier you and I talking about like capitalism, and like we can go deep into that, like how evil is capitalism, like, but if you and I don't have that conversation though, how are we able to make it more clear for us to understand what capitalism is?
Right.
Kind of like how when we first started talking about how Christians have they struggle with talking to evolutionists and talking about how creationism fits into that. And we don't have a lot of answers, but I guess I kind of feel like the church just kind of says like, this is creationism, and anyone who doesn't believe in creationism is wrong. And there's not been like there's not been a lot of conversation of it,
Right.
like, well, why do people not believe in creationism?
The way I explain it is that Christianity has settled, because they've been able to for a long, long time. They've settled for making statements and not giving explanations, and so it's like, how did things get started? The
Yeah.
Christian statement is creationism.
Yeah.
Creation, God created. That's a statement. That's not an explanation. Now, that's not to say the statement's wrong. But it's incomplete. And so people now, and there was a time, if you go back 300 years and before, let's say, people were okay with that because there was no explanations for many, many things. And especially as further back you go, nobody's offering explanations. It's like, why are you sick? Well, the gods got mad or something, and it's the statement. But as we realize that there is actual natural causes for natural effects, then we start explaining things. And now the idea that a Christian can just make a statement and people are going to accept that statement as being the answer,
Right.
They're not going to.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that the statements were ever wrong. So when it's like the whole thing I try to discuss on one of my podcasts with Bill, that you ask an evolutionary biologist, why are men promiscuous? Mm-hmm. Well, they'll give you a whole explanation,
Yeah.
right, on why that is. And I don't agree with it, but it's an explanation. Like they'll all go into the evolutionary biology of it, and they'll go for hours explaining every part of how that mechanically works. You ask a Christian, they'll say sin.
Right.
Okay, but how does that work? That's just a statement. It could be perfectly accurate, but it's just a statement. Like, what's the answer? How does sin work? I don't find anyone giving any answers.
Right.
And I think that's terrible because we live in a world now that wants answers.
Right.
Wants explanations to
Right.
the statements.
So when I was listening to you and Brett Carpenter talk about creationism in classes, I remember thinking as a young girl, seeing creationism in my science class was very confusing for me. I, at that young age, knew that creationism didn't have a place in the science class because there's nothing scientific about creationism. You cannot apply the scientific method to creationism. You can hypothesize, but you can't run a test. You can't send that test and its results to your peers for them to review it and for them to run their own test. So that was really confusing for me to see that in in my science book, I always felt that creationism definitely belonged in like religion classes. And I did not, even at that age, I didn't like that Christians were pushing for creationism to remain in the science class. I thought that was like, one, if you think that pushing your religion into a government-funded school is going to keep children moral, you are so off. Like, creationism does not have a place in science, and here's the other part. If Christians are going to group all of us together and they're going to say, we all are going to make this statement that creationism belongs in science class. Well, I'm a Christian and I don't believe that. I think if you're going to teach religions in school, it needs to remain in theology and religion courses where it belongs. Not in a science class where you're teaching that everything in the science can be applied through the scientific method, and creationism cannot be applied through the scientific method.
That's right.
So
the argument, just to give a moment of fairness to the other side,
Okay.
that I get. So the argument that Brett and others make, Bill and others have made with me, is, well, much of evolution falls in the same category.
Right, it's a theory.
Right. It can't be proven. They're
proven.
making speculations. There's no way to test it. And my answer to that is, right, I'm not saying get rid of creationism and only teach this theory. I'm
Right.
saying I think in science we should be teaching science.
Right.
And across the board. And since I'm a Christian, I'm saying I'll put Annie up first and say creationism shouldn't be there
Yeah.
because it's not science.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of teachings on evolution I don't think should be in there either. Not
Right.
all of them, but there's a lot of them that I think have not cleared the bar for being,
Right.
let's say, good science.
Yeah, there's a lot of curriculum.
But there's an important difference between evolutionism and creationism on that discussion, and
Right.
that is evolution is an attempt at a natural explanation for natural occurrences,
100%.
even if
Yeah.
it's a completely wrong one, right?
Yeah.
If I say I have a theory that when grass grows, then gophers come out of the grass, that is a natural explanation for where gophers come from.
Right.
Now it's completely wrong.
Right.
Gophers do not sprout out of grass,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's completely wrong, but it is a natural explanation for it. So
Yeah.
in that sense, I would say, bad science is better science than creationism.
Right. Yeah, and there's another point I wanted to make about this. So it could also create a problem because then it makes the teachers responsible for teaching your child about creationism, because the argument from Christians is like, this needs to be taught in schools. Children need to hear the gospel truth. They need to be aware of it. But for me, it's like, I don't want any other person in charge of my child's faith.
Correct.
I don't want the school involved with it. I don't want a teacher, bless their hearts, being pushed.
Well, think about. I understand what you're saying.
Right, it's
What if the roles were a little reversed? What if the majorities in this country were a little different, and the Native Americans were the majority of the population? They have a creation myth also.
Yeah.
Right? And it's very different than the Christian creation myth or creation
Yeah.
story. I'm not saying that the Bible's myth. Stay with me here. This is all you got to clarify with some people in the audience. I tell you, it's hilarious. They're like, Michael believes the Bible's a myth.
Oh man. Check those comments.
It's a rhetorical device, right, where you put everything into one category so you can talk about it equally. It doesn't mean you actually think they're all in the same category. Anyways, so the Native Americans have a creation story. Mm-hmm. And theirs is very different than the Bible creation story. Now, would
It's a
you
beautiful
want
story,
that,
too.
Would you want
Yeah.
that creation story taught in science class as a Christian? If you think creation is science, well, that's a creation story.
Yeah.
Well, no. And do you want the government deciding
Right.
which creation story is true and which one is not?
Right.
because it's easy to say yes when you're in the majority and the majority is a Christian-leaning nation. I've lived in places where quote-unquote Christianity is not the majority. Catholicism is, but it's not Christianity as we understand it.
Yeah.
So I've been in countries where it's like that. So, for instance, when I was 8, we moved to Mexico, and they put me in school. I didn't know any Spanish. They put me in a public school where nobody, not even the teachers, knew English. Nobody knew English, and I didn't know Spanish. And I was the only white kid in the school. And so they had it was like right before their Independence Day. And the leader of the Mexican independence was a Spanish priest by the name of Miguel Hidalgo. He was like their George Washington way back. And but he was Spaniard, so he was white. He was very fair. And so, well, they got all happy because every year they put on a play and somebody is Miguel Hidalgo, right?
Yeah.
But they're all these real dark complected kids in that town where I was at. And they're playing Miguel Hidalgo, which is, none of them are fair complected. Well, when I got there, they were like ecstatic. Now they had their lead actor, right?
Yeah.
Who looked like, and so they made me like a beanie out of a stocking with because he was like bald, like a typical, typical priest. And then the white cotton to make my little hair there. But the thing is, my parents said, look, he can't carry Miguel Hidalgo is a Catholic priest. And so he carried a Virgin of Guadalupe. That was their flag. He carried that flag in battle. And they said, he can't. We're Christians. We don't believe in that.
Yeah.
He can't. So they're like, oh, okay. So my dad made me a torch.
Yeah.
And I was going to carry that. Well, right before it starts, they were on my torch, and I don't know anything. I don't even know what's going on. I don't know anything about anything. And they come in, they take my torch away, and they give me something else.
Oh my
and
gosh.
then I go marching out.
Oh my
and
goodness.
all the missionaries, it's like they all went.
No.
So there's like 12 missionary families at that time there, and they're all there to watch it because I'm the first kid of all of us that are in something.
Oh no.
And here I am.
Oh my God.
Marching through the school, carrying that big old Virgin of Guadalupe.
Oh my gosh. That is terrible. That is so not a good look. No.
And everybody knows that we're Christians, that we don't, because we preach out in the open, right?
And you're just probably giddy, just like,
I had no idea what I was even holding. I didn't even know. I didn't know anything about Mexico.
Yeah.
I grew up in Michigan. There's no idolatry in Michigan. You don't see that.
Yeah.
I never knew there was anything about idols and images. I had no idea. It was just a stick with a piece of paper on it. Yeah. And I'm like, all proud, marching and yelling, and what we're yelling is, long live the Virgin Mary, long live the...
gosh, that gets worse.
Yes,
oh, man.
yes, my parents and everyone, they're just like dying of embarrassment.
Make it stop, make it stop.
My point is, that was a public government school, and Mexico is more hardline on secularism in school than the States is. There is no public prayer formally, officially, nothing, no religion whatsoever at all in public schools officially. But because Catholicism is 98% majority rule in Mexico, then it's full of Catholicism.
Yeah.
These schools have all these things, and they have all these genuflexes to Catholicism because they rule.
Yeah.
Well, I've lived in that type of where you're like, I've had times when my kids have had to take a failing grade to not sing to the Virgin Mary on her birthday in public school, which is secular, but because it's 98%. So I find that Christians are pushing for that environment here while they're in control, but they won't always be in control.
No.
And when they're not, what happens when we start getting, our kids are being taught animism, where animals are like gods and their spirits indwell human beings, like the Native Americans believe. It won't be long before the left is going to be teaching that kind of stuff as a courtesy, or curtsy, to these religions.
We really, that's a really good point. And we have to, for me, I have to prepare for that. I have to prepare for my daughter coming home and being like, hey, Mom, the school just taught me that I could be an animal, or
I'm a reincarnated animal.
Yeah. So this is why it's so important for me to my defense for that is I'm not going to depend on anyone being in charge of teaching her the truth except myself, and my Christian family. ultimately I'm going to be in charge of it, and I have to be in charge of it. Like that is a mission that I feel like really passionate about for her. So this is another interesting thing I wanted to bring up, speaking about churches and what they push. So, and I have permission from my friend to talk about this because him and I were talking last night. Yeah, this is going to be like a wild one, but him and I, so he's a worship leader at a church in San Antonio, and he has a heart for God. He's a family man. He's married. He has 2 beautiful kids, and often him and I will kind of share ideas about Christian faith, and he's pretty vocal on social media about God and Christ, and anytime like I could reach out to him anytime and kind of like pass some ideas around. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't, but so we know these riots with George Floyd. He made a statement that the church needs to take a stand on this George Floyd thing. And my rebuttal to him was like, well, hold on, because, one, who's going to make this statement? Who's going to put this statement together? And what are you going to do about the Christians who don't agree with it? And, and his response was like, well, like, this is pretty simple because it's biblical. We should all be against like racism, and we should all, strive for such and such. And my rebuttal to that is like, what about the Christians who don't believe that this was a racist act? What about the Christians whose businesses have been destroyed because of like the riots and the protesting? And what about the Black Christians who don't believe that this is a racist killing as well? Like, what are you going to do about the Black community in the Christian church who disagree with you? That is the problem with group identity.
Yeah.
Like, because you blanket everyone and you forget that this is we are individuals. You forget, like, not everyone is going to have the same perception as you. And I'm not saying that he has a bad perception.
No, I understand what
agree
you're
with
saying.
him. I agree with him. Like, we should like absolutely, say like racism is bad, and I'm not going to allow it in my house. Like, I certainly don't want it in my church. Like, this is very obvious to me. But I just I don't like when Christians want to use their faith and say like, I'm going to politicize my faith to take a stand on it. Like, I have a problem with that one, because you can't speak for the entire Christian nation.
Yes,
Because-
that's exactly right.
Because like we are a family of many different nations. We are a family of many different skin colors, and this one is just like, nah, you can't politicize this. You can't use your Christian faith to make a political statement. You really can't.
I think that Christians, as Christians, and this is the thing, Christians have to learn to, and this is what I try to do. They have to learn to separate their identities.
But see, I felt like for so long I wasn't allowed to separate my identity.
Yeah.
That
Well, I get a lot of people don't like what I do, the way I talk, because I'm pretty effective at doing that into multiple different types of identity. So I can talk as a Christian, as a pastor, and if you ask me, what do you think about creation as a pastor? Well, I'll have one answer for you. If you ask me that as a person, well, I'll have a very different answer on the issue. Now, they're not conflicting. It's not like I'm, Jekyll and Hyde. It's not like I believe in it and then you ask me, but not as a Christian. Oh, it's bogus. In my opinion, my views on this are all consistent, but I don't have the same answer as if I'm thinking, what would I preach in church, as what would I teach if I was also at the same time a school teacher?
yeah.
So if you came to me as a pastor and said, what do you think about creation? I would have one answer. But if I was also a school teacher and you said, okay, as a school teacher, what do you think? Well, then I would have a different answer. I'd say, I wouldn't teach it. I don't think it should be taught in science class.
Yeah.
It's not science. And people cannot imagine how those can. It's like, if you're a Christian, you have to push Christianity in that way, the same way, across every dimension of your life.
Yeah.
I just can't do that.
Yeah. So
I'm too objective to see it that way.
Yeah, I struggled with that for a while as well, because I thought that was the only way to be a Christian.
Well, it's a big part of our mutual background.
Right.
Is that type of viewpoint.
Yeah.
And I understand where they're coming from. I was that way for a long time. I haven't always been the way I am now.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm not the way I am now in the future. I hope I keep changing. And I don't know
Right.
how. I do, because if I quit changing, then someone needs to check my pulse.
Yeah.
Right?
Keep thinking.
Yes, exactly right. And keep finding where I
keep
might
criticizing.
Be, yes.
Yeah.
And not just bad ideas. So that's one thing. I did like what he said, but I would change what Sam Harris said, and I would say we need to be able to criticize all ideas.
Right.
Because a good idea is only a good idea when it withstands criticism.
Right.
We can't know that something's a good idea a priori.
Yeah.
So we can't know it beforehand. Like the idea that, it's like, why would you think something that's wrong? Well, obviously I didn't think it was wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you can look out at the landscape of ideas and pick out the good ones.
Yeah.
You just look out there and you start criticizing them. You start shooting at them.
Yeah.
You take your gun, figuratively speaking, YouTube. You take your weapon and you start shooting at ideas. And whichever ideas you can't kill, those are good ideas.
Right.
But they have to take some bullets or you'll never know.
Right. So I have to do that. That's what I had to start doing when I was kind of like getting into like far right ideas is I had to stop taking everything that was coming my way
No
that the right
kidding.
was giving me, and I had to take a step back and be like, I need to be able to criticize like both sides, like right and left.
The
So
right is full of misinformation.
it is.
Terrible.
Yeah.
I can't stand
Are we
it.
back on YouTube yet?
No, we won't be back. We're gonna have to
I'm
put
saying.
it.
I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. Now they're like,
Oh, back on. Yeah. We'll allow it.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, they're terrible. You believe they've censored this? Or what we were saying? We weren't even saying anything. It's
Oh my
hilarious.
gosh.
It's hilarious.
I wonder if it was the Sam Harris thing,
I don't know.
because that's like a big moment for people.
I can't see the continuation of the sentence, so.
Yeah, well, the sentence is meaningless. They say we took the video down because of copyright issues. It's a generic. It doesn't mean that. There is no copyright issues. We have no background music. We have no background logos
Right,
or
we're
anything.
just talking.
That's just something they put on there.
Okay.
It's
So
because they
wild.
don't like. So when the coronavirus thing first started, every time I would say the word, they'd ban the video. They'd yank it. Every time I say the word, you could not say the word or they yanked the video.
Well, now you can say it because apparently it's gone away. With all these like these protests.
Yeah, it's
these
very.
thousands of
Nobody
people.
knows, and that's the criticism of YouTube. And I'm trying to figure out some way to distribute these things not on YouTube. And
Yeah,
I
you
don't
could
know
probably
how.
do. Well,
I've thought about Facebook,
What
but
is-
they have some of the same issues, which gets us where we wanted to kind of go, right? With free speech.
oh yeah, free speech.
So. So anyways, you wrote me an email after what podcast was it? Was it one
It's
with
Liz.
Brett?
No,
Oh, it was one
Liz.
with Liz. Okay. So you wrote me an email and you had some issues with some of the things I said. Why don't you go through that kind of what you
Okay,
where
so
you are on
I'm putting my thoughts together on this one.
right.
So what? Okay, so when I should have re-listened to what you and Liz talked about, but what it was. You had made a comment about the Dallas woman who went to jail for opening her business.
Oh, right. It was whether there should be whether it's okay for there to be a cost on free speech.
Right.
Was kind of what my point was.
Yeah, and when I was listening to you, I felt that you were being complacent, and you were like, well, this is just the law, and this is just the way it is, and there's not much that we can do right now. And me coming from somewhere where my free speech I felt like was really taken away from me, like I couldn't criticize the people in my group at the time, and I really felt like my free speech I wasn't allowed to express it. It kind of like hit a little soft spot because I was like, oh man, like now it gets dangerous. Like I understand if, maybe I'm taking it too far, maybe I'm taking it out of context, but anytime and I'm going to make this personal.
Okay.
Anytime I get complacent about free speech, I have to remind myself of how important it is, because I don't like hate speech laws, but I can't argue that hate speech doesn't exist. It does, So I get nervous when I start to see a society whose government wants them, just right now, like being censored on YouTube. Like we can't even like share this really important story, this really important idea, because it just didn't happen to me. There are like thousands of people who are stuck in their doctrines and don't know how to get out of it, and who don't know it's okay to get out of it. It's okay to think for yourself. It's okay to be who you are and still be confident that you're making wise decisions and being assertive, and you don't have to identify with a political party to be assertive. So anytime I kind of feel like, there's like a complacency about this free speech, it makes me nervous, because it's like, where are we going with this?
All right, so here's what I was trying to say, and I haven't listened to it again to know if I made my point clear and you're misunderstanding, or if more likely I didn't make myself clear. Because I tend to think things and I say them in ways that make sense to me, and I don't always, according to my wife, explain myself well.
Yeah.
So that's most likely what happened. But there's like a 10% chance you misunderstood me. So I'm going to latch on. I'm going to grab onto the 10%.
Okay.
So here's my point. So I'll make my point, and then you can tell me what you think about that. I believe that free speech comes with a
cost
built into it that is unavoidable. And if we
you're saying there's a risk?
Yes, there's
Okay.
a price to pay
I agree
for
with
it.
that.
There's a price to pay. And we have to accept that price is there. We would all prefer it not be there.
That's where I didn't agree with you.
Okay. Well, let me finish, and then you can tell me.
To accept that there's a price to pay.
Okay.
That's what...
All right. So I believe we have to accept that there is a price that we have to pay for it. Let me word this very carefully. Mm-hmm. I believe we have to accept that there is a price that will be required to be paid. There's no way around it. And that anyone who wants the privilege of free speech, wants the power of free speech, they have to be willing to pay the price. And my problem is when we get these people who are whining about free speech, and what they're really upset about is that they had to pay any price at all to have it.
No, I don't agree at all. I think
Okay.
the price has been paid, and that now I'm not saying
Who paid it?
our American Revolution. That's 1776 when.
Well, see, that to me is a mistake, to believe that anything can be done at any period of time that then covers all future generations. That now we can all
that's when
live
it was
in
established, though.
comfort.
That's when free speech was established
As
in
a
that time
negative
period.
right. As a negative right. The U.S. Constitution does not provide positive rights, which is the brilliance
Okay, well
of it.
then you need to define to me what a negative right is and a positive right is, because you sent me a long email, and I'll be honest with you, I was like, I'll just talk to you about this.
That's what she said. She criticizes my emails too.
Okay, but let's talk about that, because
Okay.
I saw that in the email, and
Right.
I wanted you to digress
Okay.
on that, because that's the first time I've heard about a negative right and a positive right.
Okay, so this is a very, very important distinction that that differentiates the U.S. Constitution from any other constitution that I'm aware of in the world. Mexico, give you a real quick a parallel. Mexico modeled their country after the U.S.
Right.
Right? And so they have, more than almost any other country in the world, they are like the U.S. So they have a president, they have senators, they have congressmen, they have Supreme Court, they have a constitution. I mean, it is like, they looked at the U.S., they idolized the U.S. back then, and they modeled their country after the United States. And they got it all wrong. Mm-hmm. All of it. It's amazing. They got it all wrong because they didn't understand the Constitution. Mm-hmm. They didn't understand. So the Mexican Constitution is a document in which the government grants people rights.
Okay.
Okay? That's how they saw it. That's how all the world, as far as I know, there may be
Right.
some places
But
that aren't that way.
our document, our U.S. Constitution solidifies that we have inalienable rights that are God-given. So
Well,
our U.S. Constitution.
That would be the Declaration.
Declaration.
The Declaration of Independence,
Sorry.
which is an illegal document. But the U.S. Constitution, what it does is it says the people have all the rights. Now, it never mentions God, or inalienable. But the Constitution starts off with the premise that the people have all the rights. Any right you can imagine, now, or even right you can imagine. All rights are owned by the people. And the people, through this legal document, are giving to the government some rights.
Yeah.
Now, it sounds similar, but it is worlds apart. It is night and day difference between those two things. In the Mexican and all other constitutions practically, the government's saying, we're going to give you the right to free speech. We're going to give you the right to bear arms. We're going to give you the right to
Which is a real problem, because if they can give it, they can take it.
That's right. And they're saying the government owns the rights, and we're going to decide which ones you have.
Yeah.
The Constitution.
It's like a lease.
That's right.
We're letting you lease out these
We're
rights.
giving them to you. That's right.
And it can be taken away at any time if you
Yes.
abuse it.
Where our Constitution is completely the opposite.
Right.
We're saying we're the people, and we are relinquishing these rights to this extent, not completely, how would I put it? Not without limits. It's not just that you have this right unlimitedly. We're telling the government, we're going to give you the right to do these things to this limit and no more. And anything we don't enumerate, anything we don't spell out as you having a right to, the government, you don't have that right. We keep it.
Okay.
So the government can't come later and say, well, there were no semi-automatic weapons when the Constitution was written. Therefore, you don't have the right to semi-automatic weapons. No, that's not how it works. We granted the government the right to use certain enumerated things. And if we don't put it in the Constitution, it's our right, not yours. Mm-hmm. So we don't need the government to we don't need to update our document to create new rights as things become available. So when they thought of freedom of speech, they thought of the newspaper, not the internet. So when the internet comes out, do we need to rehash our Constitution and say we also have freedom of speech on the internet? No. The brilliance of our document is we have freedom of speech on every possible way imaginable and unimaginable.
Right.
Because we did not grant it to the government.
Right. Okay.
So the negative right is that, in which we're saying you can't take this away from us. The positive right is the government must give it to you.
Okay.
So
I'm
Mexico
with you
has
on that.
positive rights.
Okay, so I'm with you on that.
Okay, so because the government isn't giving it to us, then it's something that we have to constantly embody
And
claim and
protect
pay the,
and the government.
pay the price
Okay,
for it.
so pay the price
right.
for it. Okay.
So when we say, somebody gave us this right, no, nobody gave us the right.
Yeah.
That's the idea of the Declaration. They're inalienable rights granted by the Creator, which means that they're not from the Revolution. They're not from the Independence. They're not in 1776. These are rights that God breathed into Adam and Eve.
Right.
And they're in humanity. They're human rights. And nobody gave them to us.
Right. So don't you think? Wouldn't you agree though that if we the people recognize that this is a God-given right, and the government who is established, same Americans, people within the government, there shouldn't. I don't see how a price needs to be paid for something that has been given to us through God. I don't think that we're at a place in our society where that's necessary. And
it's more necessary than ever. It's like this. We're here talking about this and we get yanked off of YouTube. That's a price we just paid.
Right.
For talking about it.
Well, but
and when I upload it, they'll yank it.
You know what? I'm going between like the price and the risk.
Well, in many ways, it's the same thing.
I came here knowing that there was a risk of being pulled off, of being censored. But do I feel like I paid a price? No. What price did I pay? I took a risk.
But that is a price. Now, you have to realize, and whenever we talk about paying a price, you have to realize there's all ranges. So, for instance,
okay, then what was the price?
Did I lose my life for it? No. I didn't pay that much. But am I willing to pay that kind of price for free speech? That's the question. So when we talk about the military and people say, well, the reason you have freedom of speech is because they're willing to give their life for it, right? So
Right.
somebody's willing to pay a price up to giving their life for it.
Okay.
But then that's a price.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that it's not complacency, and it's not even acceptance, and it's not approval.
Okay.
It's just facts.
All right.
The fact is, and I've lived this more than most people you're going to talk to. I lived in Mexico as a preacher. I would stand out on
Well,
the
yeah, because
street.
you went to jail.
I went more than just to jail.
Yeah.
So I've had guns pulled on me. I've
yeah.
been burned.
Yeah.
I've been beat. I've gone through
Right.
not terrible persecution, but I have paid a price to stand on
I
the
agree.
street and express an opinion about religion.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever police would come, they would say, we don't approve of what they're doing, but if you're going to be doing this, that's probably what's going to happen. And I would always tell them the same thing. I know. I knew that when I came out. I was willing to be burned with cigarettes to go out there and preach the gospel.
Right.
And I was willing to pay the price for that. And it wasn't, and from the religious side, I was willing to do it for the gospel. From the social or civic side, I was willing to do it for the right to express myself, to say what I thought. And if it means I went to jail for a week, or I got deported from the country, or I got a gun put on my temple when I was 13 years old preaching, whatever,
Yeah.
that's the price.
Right. I had a thought I wanted to share about this.
All right.
We're talking about the price. I'm trying to think of where I was going to go with this. We're talking about Dallas woman. It's not coming to me right now.
Okay, well, that's
so,
fine.
Yeah.
But you see what I'm trying to say. I don't know if I'm explaining myself any better now. And so my problem is, like, for instance, you saw this. I saw this with, like, the Duck Dynasty thing. That, I don't know if you've ever saw the show Duck Dynasty.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he mentioned like a.
Yeah, he made some very frank comments
Right.
about homosexuality.
Yes.
Which I actually agreed with, right? But they were crude. I mean, he's
Yeah.
a crude guy. He's not. They weren't lewd. They weren't they weren't nothing like what comedians do. He was being serious. He's just plain spoken, very plain spoken, and he made some comments which I agree with. I think his point was valid. I think it was right, and he wasn't talking about anybody in name. He wasn't naming people and harassing individuals. He was speaking on an idea, saying, this is what I think about this idea. So then they pull his show.
Okay.
They cancel his
Yeah.
show. Well, then all these Christians are like, oh, they killed free speech. And like, no, they didn't. That's just the price.
Yeah.
He had free speech, but it doesn't mean there's no cost to it.
Okay. So you just reminded me of what I wanted to say.
Okay.
What, and I guess I want to lay out the dangers of living in a government who requires a price to be paid to exercise a right. So what happens when a price has to be paid is that it makes it a dangerous place, because now the government says, now they're in control of you. You have a right, but now they're in control of it, because not everyone is willing to pay that price. And I'll be honest with you, as a mother who is single and, depends on the income that I get, I'm not willing to pay a price for it. I have too much to lose. I have a daughter that I need her to have a home, and she needs to depend on me, and she needs to be able to know that my mother won't make any risky decisions that would put me in a worse position. I'm not willing to pay that price. I'm just not. So for someone like me who says I can't pay that price, but I still have this right, what happens is the government involuntarily creates a group of people who are now scared to exercise that right.
True. So,
And that, to me, that, I guess I'm taking it a step further,
Okay,
because
but
I'm not
here's the thing.
disagreeing with
No,
you.
I understand what you're
okay?
saying.
But I want to take it a step further and says, okay, so we've established there's a price to pay. Now, what is the danger to that? Is
Okay,
we
but-
foster a
but
society.
here's a couple caveats we have to put on this before we pursue the line of thought. One is, in our particular scenario, which is in the U.S., the government cannot impose a price on free speech. That's what the Constitution guarantees.
Wait, say that again. The
The
government.
government is not allowed to impose any price on free speech. That is the guarantee of the Constitution. So the government cannot infringe, it says, on freedom of speech. So, but this is where there might be a misunderstanding with not just you, but anyone listening to me, because we tend to like mix it all up together.
Okay.
The government is not allowed to censor you in any way, your speech. And I think in the U.S., that is pretty well maintained.
Right.
It's maintained because there is a whole army, left and rightist.
They can only condemn.
The government can't do anything about free speech. And I think that the government really in the U.S. does a pretty good job at not getting involved in it, not limiting speech, the government. And the reason is because we have a whole army of leftists and rightists, not all of them, but of each side, of all sides of the spectrum, who are constantly fighting the battle
Right.
and taking the government to court even over things I don't necessarily think fall under free speech, like pornography.
Yeah.
Right? They're constantly the ACLU and the Freedom Coalition, and they're on all sides of this political spectrum that love free speech and do not want the government censoring. And they have a legal way of preventing it. And they're constantly taking the government to court, and they're constantly winning. Free speech has probably the best track record in courts of anything that's ever been in
Yeah,
court.
but what do you do for people like me who aren't willing to go that extra mile because of the risk and the price?
But you don't have any government risk. The government's not censoring you. And the chance of them doing
Well-
it is like almost
well-
zero.
Well, I think that when the government adopts the idea that speech should be controlled, like the city
Like in-
council,
like what-
the city council.
Oh, but see...
No, I listened to your podcast and
Uh-huh.
your response, and because I had emailed you and I was like, what about the
Yeah.
city council? Like, they're impinging my rights. And then, of course, when I listened to your response to it, and they broke it down, and they actually weren't limiting it. They were just condemning, this hate speech of like the Kung flu virus and all of these like
Yes.
funny words for it.
They're saying we don't like it.
Yeah.
That's what they were saying. We
Right.
don't like when people say that.
But it would be interesting to
But
see.
that only prevents people who are uninformed. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not agreeing with it. I'm not saying it's okay. And if there were any way you could get someone with standing on this issue, I almost guarantee there is somebody out there willing to pro bono take them to court over
Right.
it and make them retract it.
Right.
But you'd have to get someone with standing.
Right.
You'd actually have to find somebody who could plausibly tell a judge, it impeded me. I felt constrained.
Yeah.
And that's going to be hard to do.
Right. So
But my point is that government, let me finish real quick. My
Okay.
point is that as far as the government's concerned, I think we live in a great place. I've been in places where the government does. In Mexico, the government imposes restrictions on
Right.
speech illegally.
right.
Their constitution guarantees freedom of
I
speech
think
also.
I think the government I have never tasted what real imposing is like from the government, and I probably never will. So I'd have to agree with you. Like
Yeah, so that's great. That
Yeah.
means that our Constitution, after 300 years almost, is still brilliant,
Right.
And it's still great. But all the Constitution guarantees is that the government can impose a price.
Yeah.
It does not guarantee that your friends can impose a price.
Right.
That your business partners,
Yeah.
that your boss, your employees, anyone else you deal with. Because why? Because it's a negative right.
Yeah.
The people kept the right to impose a price on free speech for themselves. So
Right.
an individual can say, I'm not going to be your friend if you're going to talk about that.
Right.
That is a price on freedom of speech.
Okay. But I think it gets tricky when the government starts adopting these hate speech ideas, and it's tricky for me because when the city council put out this, like, a lot of people were like, yes, this is great, this is amazing, this is so good, this is gonna, like, what is it gonna do? I don't know, but it's like, it's hate speech, down with hate speech,
Yes.
And
No, it's terribly.
and
It's a
what
slippery
it
slope.
did. Yeah,
Obviously.
it is a slippery
Yes.
slope, and I worry about what it's going to do to society.
too.
And I worry about like where we're headed with this, because it seems like we're almost there. We're right there. We're like, the government may actually be able to do it. There may be.
It's feasible, but it's way outside the realm of probability at this point. Now, the reason why is because there's a lot of people who are not complacent and they're willing to sue the government constantly. And that maintains the government's restriction on not imposing
Right.
censorship, okay? But here's my issue, and this is why I want people to understand what I'm trying to say, because to me it's so important. If we don't understand the distinction between the government and the individual, and their right, that the individual has a right to impose a cost on you for free speech, but the government does not. And if we don't understand why those are different, we're actually contributing to the government taking over speech.
Right.
It's actually counterproductive to not understand those two things.
Right.
Right. So the reason why it's different is because the government has has the ability to kill you.
Yeah, it does.
Right. So the punishment for every crime is death.
Yeah.
Every crime. It doesn't matter what it is. Like this whole thing with George Floyd, and some people are saying, well, it was just $20 check. And I'm not arguing for, against, or editorializing on what happened. My point here is any crime, jaywalking. What is the penalty for jaywalking? It's death.
Could you
It's
clarify?
always death. Okay, so what happened?
So are you saying that like force can be used that would result in death, and it would be an excusable?
That's right.
Okay,
Yes.
I got you.
So,
All right, I
so
agree.
you jaywalk, they give you a ticket for $5. What if you don't pay the ticket? What if you don't accept the ticket?
What if you run?
What if
and
you
don't
run?
take it?
Well, the only reason anyone pays the ticket is because they know that if they don't, the end of that road is laying on the ground with a cop on you and you die.
Yeah.
That's why you comply. If not, then why do the cops have guns?
Yeah.
They have guns in order to enforce every law, not just the laws that fall under the death penalty.
Yeah.
They don't. It's not. They use the gun on. They pull that gun on anybody who commits a crime. It doesn't matter what it is.
No
'Cause
matter
the
how
penal-
small or large.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Like
'Cause-
I've seen the gun be pulled out on like a random traffic stop.
Yeah, if they at all think you might be a danger,
And-
boom, here
yeah.
comes the gun.
Yeah.
And it's because the ultimate penalty for any crime has to be death. Otherwise, you're not going to enforce anything. If you don't think, in the end, I could die,
Yeah.
then you're not going to pay any ticket. Who's going to pay the tickets?
Right.
And if you're not willing to put them to death, then you can't do anything else. You say, well, we'll put them in jail. What if they don't want to go? What if they get their AR-15s and they're in their house and they're like, we're not going. If you come in my yard, I'm going to shoot you.
Yeah.
Well, then you're not taking anyone to jail. And as soon as you find out that you can commit a crime and they're not going to shoot you and they're not going to kill you for it, eventually, at the end of the road,
Yeah.
everybody's going to riot and loot and commit every crime. The reason why we have looters right now is because they all know nobody's going to shoot them.
Yeah. It's not the time. They won't do it.
The police
Maybe.
kill just a couple of, and I'm not advocating any of this, okay?
Yeah.
I'm not saying the police should do this. I'm just saying if we're in some military state, and they did that, and they shot a couple of them, like Russia, there wouldn't be any looting. That'd be the end of looting. Because now the penalty for looting is death.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the difference between the government and anyone else.
Right.
The government has unlimited power to squash anything they can. And the government is not benevolent. I do not think the U.S. government or any government is benevolent. I think they're vicious because they're composed of people like you and I, and we're all vicious.
Yeah. Well, and they also have power.
But they have power.
Yeah.
Right. But individuals don't have that power. They have very limited power. So, for instance, I can impose a price on you for free speech. You can come in my house and say anything you want. But I can listen to it and go, you know what? I don't like what you're saying. Get out of my house. Now I've imposed a price on you. I won't be your friend. I'll block you on my Facebook. I'll unfriend you. I'll unfollow you. I'll whatever it is.
Okay.
Right?
So I want to take that a step
Okay.
further.
Sure.
I want to talk about sensitivity to speech.
Okay.
because I think that speech, even hate speech, can be tolerated. And I'm not saying that it should be tolerated, because there's obviously a line where eventually there are some ugly things that I've said, that other people have said. So I understand that there is a line, but I also want to talk about like this heightened sensitivity, like the Kung Flu virus. That is heightened sensitivity on comedy, and who would have thought we'd be here being intolerant of comedians? Like, if there was any particular group that I thought would be untouchable to speech, it would be comedians. But how many comedians have had their entire careers and all the work that they've put towards the careers just like stripped from them? And who speaks really good about this is Ricky Gervais. He does a really good job at talking about like the hostility that's met with comedy. And it's like, comedy there's no limits. It's comedy, like, and I think that when the government becomes too involved with trying to regulate speech, it fosters a society that is too sensitive to manage listening, thinking, and hearing, and having a conversation. So, like, the side effects of the government getting too involved is you change the society. You change the way that society responds and reacts, and you recondition them to become intolerant to any form of speech, because that's where I see it going. Like, if I could sit here and be like, how far can this go? Okay, that's definitely how far that can go. We can get to a place where we can be so intolerant to where anything you tell me, I can say, that's hate speech, and the government needs to get involved, and I'm going to report you.
Right, and that's where you have, that's what you have in places like Canada and
Right.
the UK
Yeah.
that don't have that brilliant constitution that we do,
Yeah.
that prevents our government from being able to do that. And the U.S. government can't do it. They've struck down every attempt at hate speech laws in the U.S. So people talk about it like it's there, but it's not there. And this a lot comes from people being so misinformed. There are many people who are misinformed and think that in the U.S. there are hate speech laws.
Yeah.
There are not. There is
Yeah.
no such thing in the U.S.
Right. And I understand that,
so-
but my focus is what it does to the society, what it does to our culture.
But here's my question then, or here's my observation, and it's kind of a question in this. With the U.S. not having hate speech laws, then it's very difficult for me to come to the same perspective you have, that it's the government that is influencing society towards this direction. I think it's society that is influencing the government, because I don't see anything the government has done to influence it. They don't have any laws on the books.
But they've tried.
People have tried to do it, but
the
what I'm saying
lobbyists,
is,
they're-
right, that's
lobbyists
coming
have
from
done
the
it,
other direction.
Politicians have done it.
But that's what I'm saying, it's coming from the other direction. See, I'm resistant to, I'm not saying it never happens, but I'm resistant usually to any idea that what we see in society is a result of what is originated
Okay.
from government. I think it's the other way around, especially in the U.S.
Yeah.
I think the reason why we have the government trying to do this is a response to their voters.
Okay, but you said that the government can practice the ultimate force of death,
That's right.
right? So
Which is why
What
these people
happens
want to
when-
enlist them into their cause.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Now we're getting to like the nitty gritty of it. Is how dangerous can this get?
Oh, horrible.
How bad can this get? Because the government can exercise force. What happens when I'm on the street and I'm talking about something and someone interprets it as hate speech, and they grab a cop and say like, she's offending me, and the cop
you
cop
go to
has
jail
yeah
if you're in Canada.
and if I resist,
Then you die.
exactly.
In Canada.
That's how far I think this is going to go.
It could. Now, there's a huge barrier, and that's the First Amendment. So and this isn't for anyone to be complacent.
Okay, but what if
This
the
is-
cop says that I have to leave the property?
Well,
Which
so,
I could, if I didn't know my rights, I could I could very well leave, and that would be the end of it.
So I have a lot of experience dealing with policemen on this exact issue, not only in Mexico, here in the States, because I street preached here in the U.S. for like 10 years. I quit doing it for other reasons, but I did it for 10 years in the U.S. And almost every time the police came out to stop me. Almost every time.
And that happened in the States?
It's here in San Antonio.
Okay.
Yeah. When we started on the south side, the church on the south side, I would street preach like twice a week down there.
Yeah.
And they would always call the police, and the police would always come out because they have to if they get called.
Yeah.
And I would say half the time, let's say 50% of the time, the police would come out and tell me, you can't be here, you can't be in the street, you can't be shouting, you can't be doing this. And I would tell them, yes, I can. And there's always this issue. So I have a lot of experience with this. So here's the deal, and here's what we have to understand if we want to really comprehend the issue and be able to deal with it properly. We have to understand the difference between what policemen do and what the law does.
Right.
They're very different. Policemen are not there to enforce the law. I know that people think they are, but they're really not. They really don't care much about the law. And they're not, that's not a criticism. That I'm not criticizing, that's not a negative thing. Policemen are peace officers. They keep the peace. They don't really care what your rights are. And they don't care what the law is. The courts will sort that out.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's
Yeah,
their
you bet.
thinking. That's right. And that's how they think. And that's the way it has to be. They're not the judicial branch.
Yeah.
They're the executive branch. They're not there to adjudicate who's right and who's wrong, who has what right. That's not what they're not in that branch. They're not the legislative branch. And so they don't do that. And so we have to be very careful and be very technical if we're going to get technical on it. If a policeman comes up and you're expressing an opinion and you're causing a problem, he's going to tell you to be quiet. He's not going to tell the 30 people that are mad at you and she hurt my feelings. He's not going to tell them anything. Because why? It's not because he thinks you're wrong. He's not actually ruling on whether or not you are wrong or right. He is saying, my job is to make sure nobody gets hurt.
Yeah.
And I am going to take the most efficient way of accomplishing that.
Okay.
And if you think I've hurt you or if I have damaged your rights, then you take that to the court and they'll adjudicate it.
Yeah.
But I'm not here to do that. And that's kind of the mentality of the cops.
So what did you say to the cops that here in the States where you told them, no, I do have a right to be here? What's their response?
Their response is, we don't care.
And what
you're causing a problem, and we're going to stop the problem.
Okay, and so do you?
And I say, well, then you'll have to take me to jail.
And did they take you to jail?
They never took me to jail.
Why not?
Because they know that it's going to get adjudicated. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They know that.
So did you stay?
Yeah, I wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
But see, I would. So everyone. Whenever I would do like street evangelism, wherever I was, and anytime I do it, my rule is everybody has to handle these situations to their conscience and to their ability.
Yeah.
And so some people, practically everybody I ever preached with, in Mexico and here, if the cops came out and said, stop, they would stop. They're like, okay, fine, we'll stop. We're not trying to make your job hard. We have a right, but we understand you have a job to do, and we're not trying to make your life difficult and whatever. And that was their tack. And that's fine. I had no problem with it, right? I had no problem with it as a Christian. Again, I have two hats.
Yeah.
So as a Christian, no problem with it. As a citizen, I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're just capitulating, and it's not going to get any better now. What you've done is you've pushed the go-kart down the slope, and now it's going to start picking up speed, right? So my approach was always different. I'm like, in Mexico, I wouldn't even stop and talk to them. I'd ignore them. Because in Mexico, if you're an American, you can push the cops around.
Yeah.
And that's a secret you learn real quick. Because they're scared to death. They don't know who you are. They're intimidated by you. They don't know what connections you have, and they assume all Americans are filthy rich and have a gun. And so, of course, I was neither. I didn't have a gun, and I was not filthy rich, and I had no connections. Right? They could have beat me to a pulp, and nobody would have cared.
That would be the end of it, right?
Yes, nobody would have cared, right? But they don't think that. And so the police in Mexico would come out, and they'd be trying to tell me, hey, you have to stop. And I would turn my back to them and keep on preaching. And they would stand there looking like fools for a couple minutes until they finally just walk away. And they would always walk away. I never once was arrested. Never once did they. It worked every time. And I did that for years. Dozens of times.
But you did get arrested.
That was not by the police. That was by immigration.
So So Mexico has their own immigration
Oh yeah.
force?
Oh
Okay.
yeah. Yeah.
And
I was actually. It was on immigration charges.
Yeah. So,
The police are all these like in Spanish they call them campesinos, which translates as farmers, but it's not really the same image. So these are like the poorest people in Mexico become policemen.
oh
The
gosh.
policeman, the job of a policeman in Mexico is like the most disdained job in the country.
Oh, man.
Nobody likes them. Nobody's proud if their son is a policeman. That means they're a crook. In many places in Mexico, I know for a fact because I actually won policemen to the Lord. They pay to be policemen. They don't get paid. So when you become a policeman, you don't get a salary. You pay a salary. So where do you think you get the money from?
Yeah.
Corruption.
Yeah, corruption.
Right? You have to shake people down. It's built into the system. You do not get a salary. You
Gosh,
have
it's
to
such a
pay.
mess.
It's a pyramid scheme. You have to pay the people on top of you, and they pay the people on top of them and top of them, and so you
What a
pay
disaster.
to get into that. Oh, it's terrible. And it's
Well, not
because
just for like that police system, but for that the people of Mexico.
everybody,
Everyone
it's
suffers.
a disaster.
Yeah, all
It's
the
a
way to the
complete-
top, someone suffers because of that.
That's exactly right.
How do you reverse that corruption?
Well, see, here's the problem with that.
You would have to dissolve the entire police force.
No, it doesn't work. I actually have this discussion all the time in Mexico. In fact, there's a lot of people in Mexico that are real angry at me over this exact discussion. Because that's what every election, the whole election is about corruption. Every election. It's every election. That's the discussion.
Yeah, so I hear that in America as well.
Yeah, and they don't even know
that-
what they're talking about.
Yeah, so that's like the rhetoric that gets
Yeah.
thrown around
In
here.
Mexico, there's real corruption. I mean, they'll take you out and kill you. The cops will take you out and kill you. So what I was doing was dangerous, theoretically. If I wasn't, Mexicans couldn't do what I did. If they did it, and I saw them try, I saw some of the people saw me do it, and they're like, oh, wow. So then they would try to do it, and
Oh,
they'd
no.
grab them by the underwear and give them a wedgie, basically, pick them up by their underwear, which lift them right off the ground by their underwear, and haul them off and dump them outside of town, like 10 miles out of town, make them walk back. That's what they would do to the Mexican brothers when they tried my stick. It doesn't work if you're a Mexican. You have to be an American to do that down there.
Man.
Anyways, so in Mexico, the corruption is real. It's not rhetoric. It's not a political game that you play to win votes. It is real. It's a
Yeah.
real problem. So that's every election. That is the issue. Who is not going to be corrupt? And they're always saying what we got to do is just take everybody out. Everybody could dissolve the government, dissolve the police. All the banana republics try this. It never works. Never works. Because those people that are corrupt did not sprout out of hell.
Yeah,
They came from the people.
right.
And the people you're going to replace them
And they're going to
with
stay there.
are the same
Yeah.
people. The people are that way.
Yeah.
I know that people are going to think that it's racist, but it isn't. I love Mexico and I love Mexicans. My kids are Mexicans. I grew up in Mexico. I went to school in Mexico. I lived for 30 years.
Do all your kids have Mexican citizenship?
Yes.
So they have American citizenship and Mexican citizenship. So
Yeah.
they can go back and move to Mexico whenever.
Anytime they want, own land. They couldn't run for president. That the Mexico Constitution wouldn't allow them because neither one of us are Mexican. So one of the parents has to be a
So
Mexican.
do their kids have Mexican citizenship?
No,
Can
that
it
they
be
could
passed
apply.
down? They
Yes,
could
they could
apply?
apply and they'd give it to them right away. Yeah, but they're not automatically officially granted it. They'd
Yeah.
have to apply. But yes, they would essentially yes, they have de facto
Oh,
citizenship.
wait. I just missed that. So you guys don't have Mexican
No.
citizenship. Okay.
No.
But because the kids were born in Mexico.
If
Gotcha.
anyone born in the territory of Mexico by constitutional law are Mexican. If you're on a plane and you have a child, your child is born on a plane while it flies over Mexico, it is a Mexican citizen.
Yeah.
That's how it works there.
Yeah. That's interesting because
Yeah.
my daughter, her dad and I are talking about getting her Brazilian citizenship.
It's good.
Yeah.
Multiple citizenships, I think, is a great thing.
Oh, it's awesome.
I think it's great. But anyways, so corruption's real. And the reason you can't get rid of it is because everybody in the country is corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
I say everybody. Obviously, there's some exceptions. I hope the Christians are exceptions. But when we're talking in generalities, they are all
Yeah.
corrupt to the very smallest one. If you leave anything anywhere, like you go down a neighborhood in the U.S. and you see bicycles in the yard, those bicycles will be gone
Yeah.
in minutes, not days, minutes. You they did a thing, was very interesting. I made a lot of people mad on a podcast with this in Spanish. a group did a study, and what they did is they took a wallet and they put money in it and they put ID in it and stuff, right? But it was like a see-through wallet, so you could see the ID, and if you turn it over, you saw the dollar bills or whatever currency.
Yeah.
And they went to like 50 countries or 30 countries and had it in, and they would drop the wallet and then see what happened. And in every country in the world except for 2, they would get the wallets back. There's only 2 countries where they didn't get the wallets back. And what they found is the more money they put in the wallet, the more likely they were to get them back. If there was no money, they didn't ever get them back. Mm-hmm. People would pitch them. But if there was money in it, they'd get them back. And the more money they put in, the more likely it was to get the wallet back.
So what were the 2 countries?
Mexico.
Mexico
And some other South American
Okay.
country. Let's say Brazil. No. I don't remember what the other one was. But I believe it was a Central or South American country.
Yeah.
But Mexico was the worst one. It was the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's
it's corruption.
the culture. It is terribly corrupt. But anyway, so that's Mexico, and that's how the police work. It's not how it works here. Mm-hmm. And we can't be complacent with it. We have to, as Americans, not as Christians, but as Americans. Because, I don't get Christianity involved in free speech.
Yeah.
I'm, as much as in me is, I'm willing to die for the gospel. And
Yeah.
I don't make claims of free speech for the gospel.
Yeah.
I'm going to preach the gospel even if there is no free speech.
Right.
Right. That's me as a Christian. Me as an American or as a citizen, I care about free speech. But because I care about it, I have to accept that individuals have a right to impose a penalty on it.
Okay. See, and I'm fine with that. I think I don't think we're branching off
No,
on,
we're not.
separate ones. To me, it's like.
But I agree with you. Government cannot get involved
Right.
because then it's over.
Yeah.
Right. Now you don't unfriend me. Mm-hmm. You get me put in jail.
Right.
Right. So
And
I
then-
agree
and if you
completely
resist,
with
you die.
That's right. And so I agree completely with you. There's this huge albatross, right? That's like the shadow is like on us. And that is,
That's how
if
I
they
feel,
can
yeah.
enlist the government
Yeah.
into this social justice war,
Yeah.
then there's no more free speech. That's it. That's over.
Yeah,
it's game over.
That's where I feel like where this is heading.
That's right.
That's what makes me so nervous when I see a city council, the smallest, tiniest little government, all of a sudden they're experts
Yeah.
on free speech. All of a sudden they're the smallest. I think of city council and it's just the tiniest, most basic form of government.
Mm-hmm.
They barely have any,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And even just to see it on that level, that's where I was kind of
Well,
man.
did you read what they put? Did you actually read the
I couldn't
text?
find it. I didn't
No?
know where to find it.
I'll send it to you.
I
It is
went
the
to
most-
I
it-
went to the government website and I was like, where do I find these documents? Where do
Yeah.
I find these team meetings from
It was.
them?
If I was them, I would hide it too because it was the most castrated version of a statement you've ever read. I mean, they were being so careful not to make a law, right? And they never even said it was hate speech to say those words.
Yeah.
It's just incredibly slimy how they did this. It was all about innuendo and plausible deniability. So if it ever got taken to court, it'd be like, there's nothing in the document that's illegal. All they said was, those are naughty, naughty words.
Yeah.
They might as well have written it in that language. These are ugly words. They hurt our feelings words.
Well, to me, it also showed just a total lack of confidence in the people who live in the city. It just showed to me it was such an arrogant move because it's we can't the city council who was voted in by San Antonians have such a lack in the people in our city that they don't even trust us to be able to use common sense and to be able to decipher between a joke, an actual hateful, hurtful speech that could incite violence.
I would agree with that, but I would say that the real problem is that they think it's any of their business at
Right,
all
right.
what we say. It is none of their business.
Right.
They have no right to comment on what anybody is saying, provided we are not instigating actual violence against other people.
Yeah.
So if actual laws are not being broken,
Right.
it's none of their business what people are saying at all. And coming out and making some type of thing. What should have happened And because I wear the hat of Christian more than I do of anything else, I didn't do it. If I wasn't a Christian, if I wasn't so committed as a Christian, perhaps even, I would have gone down and stood in front of City Hall when they were there, and I would have sat there with big signs that said Wuhan virus, flu Manchu, and any other way I could find to say that, even though I think I think they're hilarious. I love all these little terms. They're very funny. It's great comedy.
Yeah.
I think when I put on my comedy hat, whatever that, it's a very tiny hat. But whenever I put on that hat, yeah, I think they're funny, and that's hilarious, right? And when I put on any type of an intellectual hat, which also is a very tiny hat, but whenever I put on that kind of a hat, then I'm like, okay, these terms are not helpful, right? I don't use them. I would rather say COVID-19. To me, that's a more descriptive term of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
If we're doing intellectual conversation, I would never call it the flu Manchu in an intellectual conversation. It's like saying, snot and boogers when you're trying to have intellectual
Certainly,
conversation.
like if I was willing to pay that price, because if I was willing to pay that price, I would love to test that theory. Like, what are you going to do if I say kung fu
Yeah,
virus?
well, that's
I'll say it right now. Like, what are you going to do?
That is what some people, not everybody, and I don't think that every single person has to do this, but some people need to do that if we're going to maintain free speech.
Right.
I've done it as it pertains to the gospel. So in Mexico, they would tell me, or here in the States, actually it's happened here too, where I'll talk about here. So the police came out to a couple times. When I tell you, I've dealt with them so many times, but a couple times they've come out and they said, we're going to let you finish today, but you ever come back again, we're going to arrest you. And I look at him, I say, I'll be here tomorrow at 5 o'clock.
Yep.
And I go down the next day at 5 o'clock and I preach. And if they want to come back and arrest me, come and do it. Because I know by experience, if I capitulate, because I've had it done, I've seen it happen. If I say, okay, then what are they going to do on the next street? They're going to come and tell me, if you come back again, we're going to put you in jail. If you come back to this neighborhood, if you come back to the city, it'll just keep going. Now, I'm not willing to pay that price for flu Manchu and Wuhan virus and those things. That's not my fight. So I have to choose I only have so much capital to spend on this issue.
Right.
And I choose to spend it on the gospel.
Yeah.
Right. But I encourage anyone who doesn't have my perspective or my commitment to the gospel and have a commitment on other things to do it on that. Not because I believe that I want people to be saying those words. I would prefer they didn't. And not because I think they're offensive. I think that's stupid. And I don't think anyone who's Chinese is offended. And if you look at the document they wrote, they're worried about Koreans. I don't know if they realize that Koreans and Chinese are not the same. I guess for the city council, all those people looked alike.
Yeah, I think the Jews really threw me off too.
Yeah. That was hilarious. It's like, and the Jews. And if I'm a Jew, I'll be like, hey, we don't need any talk of the Jews in here. Don't
Not
start
a good
with
time. Don't bring us into this.
We're fine over here. What is wrong with you people? No, that was hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Jews. It's like, what?
When I heard you read that, I was like, what? Like, how? What? Do we even have Jews in San Antonio? Like,
it's like they just, and they're trying, and that's that slimy innuendo. They are sneaking in the Holocaust, the Nazism, right? Without saying it. They're not calling anyone a Nazi. They're not saying it's like the Holocaust. They're just saying, you're going to get the Jews.
Yeah.
And that conjures that whole mental image in a lot of people without saying it.
It's a game.
It is a dog whistle.
Yep.
It is a dog whistle, even though, I mean, that's their term, right?
Yeah.
The leftist term, but it really is.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are whistling that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but that's the idea of the price. Okay, we got to wrap it up. But that's my point, though. Of there's a price to pay for any type of free speech, and if you're going to love free speech, you're eventually going to have to pay that price. Now, it may be the price of going to jail. It may be the price of losing a friend. It might be the price of being unfollowed or whatever. And everyone has to know what it is. But my issue is, if you say there should be no price for free speech, then it's valueless. Mm-hmm. It's just like everything else. If there is no cost to it, then it's nothing.
Yeah.
Then it means nobody's paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to end with a few, like my final thought on this, because I think, my experience and my story and how I came here today is just so important. And if if anyone can watch this and listen to this, I just want them to know that, the individual is sovereign. It really is. And your individualism is paramount to not only being like a valuable person in this society, but to have to walk with Christ, because I felt like it's impossible to walk with Christ if I can't give him the most authentic part of myself. And if anyone listens to this and they're struggling with like trying to get out of an ideology, it's possible. It really is. And if it can ultimately lead you to faith and salvation, all the better, right?
Yes.
But I would say it's very hard. It's very hard to be a Christian in this world right now. But it's even more harder when you are indoctrinated in groups. And not all groups are bad, but when the group trumps the individual, it's hard for people to thrive. And I just want to end
it's very
it
hard.
on that.
I agree. I think that's very good. And if you're listening to this and you're kind of in a mentality and you're thinking, you're in a mentality and you think you're right, no matter what side you're on, whether it be politics or on religion or on doctrine, there's all kinds of these group think places, right? And you're thinking, no, I'm right though. Then you should be willing to have your ideas challenged.
Right.
And how do you do that?
Yeah.
And criticize. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by listening to things you don't want to hear.
Right.
Which I've always advocated.
And have a counter argument.
Yes.
If you're going to believe in something, be prepared, do your homework, have a counter argument, research, look at the other opposing ideas.
And the best form of it you can find.
Right.
Right. Don't look for the dumbest person on the other side
Yeah.
that you can destroy their argument on. Find the best argument.
Yeah.
So if I want to build an argument like I do for faith, well then I'm going to go listen to the very best atheist arguments I can find that make it hard for me to answer, that make me angry at times to listen to them. Because then I know I'm being challenged. And I can test my ideas to see if they're any good. I can test my arguments. I can test my explanations.
I think a really good place to start on atheism is to watch the debate series with Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. It's about 5 videos. Dave Rubin is a part of it. Oh, no.
It was Brett Weinstein for 2 of them,
yeah.
and Douglas Murray for the
Douglas
other 2.
Murray. Oh, man, I didn't get to talk about Douglas Murray.
I'll have you back on. We'll get back and we'll do it again.
Oh, man, that's like... Oh, I got to. Have you read his book?
Oh yeah, no, I haven't read his book,
Madness
but I've
of Crowds?
listened. I haven't, but I've heard him interviewed on it. I've wanted to read it.
Fantastic.
I'll look it up. We'll get you back on. We'll talk some more.
Okay,
it's one of
let's
the
do
best
it.
conversations I've had. So,
Really?
Oh yeah, it was great. I loved it. It was fantastic.
My, I'm okay. And Terry, you didn't have to get involved at all.
She didn't have to temper anything I said. Did you want to?
No, I'm good. I'm not sure I even heard anything. I'm concentrating so much.
That's what Nolan says. It's hard. You can't. That's why we need one person to do that, because if not, it would get. Anyways, I'm very happy you came in.
Man,
Thank
this
you
has
so
been
much.
amazing.
It's fun, isn't it?
Oh my gosh,
Time flies by so fast.
It really does. It's so healthy to get this out here.
Yes.
I feel like I felt like I needed to tell this story.
I think it was great. I really appreciate it. And I think we found out we're almost on exactly the same page.
I know.
With a little bit different terminology.
Yeah.
Which is great. No, really happy you came in.
Thank you.
We'll get you back in again, talk about some other stuff.
Perfect.
And
let's do it.
Do it. All right. You've been watching the Freeborn Podcast. If you made it this far and you're seeing this, that means you found the video somewhere. YouTube, for whatever reason, yanked the video about halfway through. They said it was for copyright infringement, but we don't have background music or logos or anything that would cause that. I've had this happen before, and it's always because I'm saying something they don't approve of for whatever reason. I don't know what it is exactly. They don't tell you, but I'm gonna put the podcast audio up. So you may be listening to that, and I'm trying to find a way to get the video posted. I don't know that will be possible, but I'll try to get the video up. But you can listen to the audio, and this is one reason why you should really subscribe to the audio version of this. The video version is too susceptible to censorship. The audio version is hosted on our personal Freeborn Church web servers, and it can't be yanked. So if you really are interested in this content, subscribe to the audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or just go right to freebornchurch.com, click on podcast, and all the episodes are listed there, and you can listen to them directly off of our server, which is much less susceptible to censorship. I would really encourage any of you that are concerned about free speech to start weaning yourself off of YouTube and go directly to the audio sources, where YouTube makes no money off of that and they can't censor it. Same way with Facebook, Twitter, any of these platforms. That's another thing we didn't get into. You're going to explain Twitter.
Next time.
Next time we'll talk about Twitter
we'll put a
and
list
stuff.
together.
Because somebody needs to explain Twitter to me. Here's the expert. She's going to explain Twitter to me because I don't get it.
I don't know if I'm the expert.
Okay, well, somebody's got to explain it to me. I don't get it. And so anyways, we'll talk about that next time.
Social media, Douglas Murray.
Yes.
Oh, we didn't talk about the Me Too movement.
We didn't talk about Me Too.
Oh,
We didn't
man.
talk about a ton of stuff. There was a whole lot of stuff we didn't talk about.
Yeah.
We're definitely going to get Katy back on. Katy or Catherine? Which one do you prefer?
Katy.
Katy. All right. We'll definitely get Katy back on. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for being with us. God bless you. Take care.